Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 576 Scamander, what is your relationship with my fiancé? At Moody's command, Neville and his two companions picked up daggers and plunged them into the wolf's head, blood splattering onto the ground. Many students, witnessing this gruesome scene, felt their stomachs churn and couldn't help but bend over and vomit. Professor Moody, his face somber, said softly, "You see? It's one thing to play house with wands in a clean classroom, but quite another to kill a life with a weapon and watch the light in its eyes fade. It's not pleasant, it's unpleasant," he said calmly. "But if war truly comes one day, you will have to pick up your wands and use them as weapons. I don't want you to find pleasure in killing, that's something Death Eaters enjoy. But I also hope that when danger arises, you can protect yourselves and your families, instead of losing your lives because of momentary cowardice, pity, or hesitation. This is what Albus brought me to Hogwarts to teach you." After saying this, Moody limped away again towards the depths of the Forbidden Forest. The students followed closely behind. They had left the castle in high spirits, chatting and laughing all the way, but now they were all silent, their playful noises gone. Gabrielle still seemed happy. She could hear the wind sighing through the leaves, the squirrels chirping, and even the tumbling of pine cones. She loved this forest. Reaching a stream, the little girl faintly heard a roaring sound. She listened intently for a moment, then asked curiously, "What's that sound?" Shirley whispered, "About 2 miles downstream, there's a waterfall of moderate size." "That's the sound of a waterfall. How do you know?" Gabrielle asked immediately. The girl with the ponytail looked at the familiar scenery and smiled. "Ralph and I have been here before." Ralph chuckled. "We used to come at night, but now that we're here during the day, I almost didn't recognize this stream. I remember it very clearly." Shirley smiled sweetly, her voice soft. "That night I caught a firetail fish that was over 1/2 a meter long. That fish was indeed big, and it tasted good," Ralph said. "Next time we come, we can bring some wild strawberries to bait the spot. Firetail fish love that stuff." Gabrielle, seeing the two chatting, felt no sense of being a third wheel, instead thinking Shirley was the one doing the third wheel. She tried several times to take over the conversation and draw Ralph's attention back to herself. But unfortunately, she couldn't get a word in edgewise with Shirley. The girl puffed out her cheeks, thinking that this seemingly gentle ponytail girl was surprisingly persistent. It seemed she could only come and audit Ralph's classes when Hufflepuff and Gryffindor were combined. Surely no witch in Gryffindor would want to steal Ralph from her? Gabrielle hesitated for a while, then, seeing Ralph and Sherry suddenly fall silent, she was about to speak when Ralph pressed her shoulder, looked into the distance, and whispered, "Something's approaching." "A wolf again," Gabrielle exclaimed, turning her head to look. After a moment, she caught a glimpse of a red figure emerging from the bushes. It was a magical creature, half human, half horse, red hair and beard, a shiny, reddish-brown horse's body from the waist down, and a long red tail trailing behind. The red magical creature didn't try to hide its presence. Instead, it boldly walked out of the jungle. Then, something else quietly emerged from the shadows. Looking very similar to the first creature, 3, 4, 5. A group of centaurs carrying bows and crossbows stood on both sides of the hillside, surrounding the students. The young wizards looked extremely nervous, especially the tall, red centaur, which stepped out from the crowd and walked towards them, making everyone's breathing even more rapid. But Moody said in a hoarse voice, "Don't attack." The red-haired centaur didn't attack either, but instead called out enthusiastically to the crowd, "Ralph, Sherry, what are you two doing here?" The students looked at the boy and girl in shock. They actually knew the centaur. "We're here for class in the Forbidden Forest, Ronan," Ralph said softly. "Oh, is it the Protection of Magical Creatures class?" Ronan looked at Moody and asked, "Is this your new professor? I remember it was Hagrid. Wasn't he expelled from Hogwarts for keeping a manticore?" "No," Ralph shook his head. "We're here for Defense Against the Dark Arts class. This is Professor Moody." "Oh, I see." Ronan looked a little disappointed to hear that Hagrid hadn't been expelled. "Professor Moody, this is Ronan. He's my friend, from the centaur tribe, Rolf introduced. Yes, I'm Rolf's good friend, Ronan said, greeting them warmly as it was the first time he'd seen so many ponies. Everyone also curiously looked at the group of 12 centaurs. What are you doing here? Ronan asked. We're tracking that man-headed scorpion-tailed beast, Ronan said. She's injured quite a few of our people. Hearing about the man-headed scorpion-tailed beast, the students panicked again. Don't be afraid, that thing isn't around here anymore, Ronan said, glancing up at the sky and lowering his voice. But you still need to be careful, the moon is very dim tonight, almost invisible. Ronan was speechless. It was broad daylight, it would be a miracle if anyone could see the moon. Suddenly, a deep, resolute, and unfriendly voice came from the bushes. Ronan, what are you doing? A black centaur emerged from the bushes, his belly heaving violently, beads of sweat dripping down his back. What did you say to him? The black horseman said angrily. Remember, Ronan, we swore an oath never to reveal the omens indicated by the planetary movements to anyone. I didn't reveal anything, Bane, Ronan said, pursing his lips. We were just talking about the weather. A cold front is coming, and I reminded Rove to put on an extra layer. That's right. Rove looked at Bane and noticed that one of his legs seemed to be injured, curled up in midair. He asked with a smile, Bane, what happened to your leg? Bane stepped into a magical trap and his leg got crushed, Ronan said with a hint of schadenfreude, but seeing Bane glare at him, he quickly put on a serious face. Who set up a magical trap in the Forbidden Forest? This is outrageous, exclaimed Rove. Bane, his face grim and filled with rage, roared, that's exactly what I was going to ask you. He pulled a magical animal trap from his quiver, threw it on the ground, and asked, this is your wizarding item, isn't it? Rove examined it for a moment and said, it seems so. What? A wizard hunter has appeared in the Forbidden Forest? No wizard hunter. This is a trap set by Nymeria to attack me. Bane stared intently at Rove and asked, Scamander, what exactly is your relationship with my fiancée? Chapter 577 The arrow arrives. Seeing Bane's furious outburst, the group of male students exchanging knowing glances revealed a knowing smile only men could understand. They genuinely didn't know the relationship between Ralph and Bane's fiancée, but when one man angrily questioned another, that already said a lot. However, Bane was a centaur, and his fiancée was naturally a centaur woman. Ralph was playing games, how exciting. Of course, many female students glared at Bane. How could Ralph possibly have a special relationship with a magical creature like a centaur woman? Slander, pure slander. Even if there was a relationship, it would definitely be like that of a veterinarian and an animal. Rolf, the person involved, looked confused. He raised his eyebrows and asked, excuse me, Bane, who is your fiancée? Nymeria, Ronan explained in a low voice. I told you before. Rolf thought for a moment, then suddenly realized, and clicked his tongue loudly enough for everyone to hear. Oh, I remember now, she's the centaur who ran away from her wedding 3 years ago, right? Bane, I thought you'd found her by now. What? Not only did you not find her, but your fiancé also broke your leg. You're so pathetic, Rolf said pathetic, but his face showed an undisguised schadenfreude, though he still maintained his composure and didn't laugh out loud. But the other wizards weren't so composed, they couldn't help but laugh out loud at Rolf's words. They had only ever seen runaway weddings in novels, but to actually encounter one in real life, especially a centaur, it was indeed very funny. Of course, if you just told people not to underestimate a young man's potential, they wouldn't laugh and would even respect you. But after the 3-year agreement, Bane not only failed to get his revenge but also broke his leg, adding to the drama. Bane, noticing the smug young wizards, immediately flew into a rage. His face darkened. That's because someone's been secretly helping Nymeria, providing her with plenty of medicine, magical items, and weapons. Otherwise, I would have caught her long ago. Scamander, did you make a deal with Nymeria? Bane, how could your ex-fiancé make a deal with me? Ralph smiled gently. I've never even seen Nymeria, I don't even know what she looks like. Have you seen her, Sherry? The girl with the ponytail shook her head and whispered, no, you see, Ralph shrugged, sighing, we've never seen her, we don't know your ex-fiancé, and we've never made a deal with her. As for this magical trap, it's definitely a wizard's thing, but who knows where she got it from? Is there any evidence to prove it was me? Seeing Bane about to speak, Ralph preemptively predicted, don't tell me it's the stars or divination that told you. Last night's moon even told me it was you who orchestrated this, trying to frame me." Bane opened his mouth. He had indeed intended to say that. "Bane, I feel sorry for you that your fiancée ran away," Ralph sighed softly. "But she's been gone for 3 years. If she'd been faster, she might have had a lot of little centaurs by now. You should let it go and move on. Nobody will laugh at you, even though it is quite a funny thing." Bane's face flushed red with anger. He felt a surge of rage building within him, but he forced himself to remain calm and said coldly, "What are you doing here?" "We're having class," Ralph replied lazily. "What? Do we need to report our Hogwarts schedule to you beforehand? This forest belongs to us centaurs," Bane roared, his horse's hooves slamming heavily into the ground, splashing mud. "You wizards shouldn't be here. This forest belongs to you centaurs." Ralph seemed to have heard a huge joke. He looked at Moody and asked, "Professor, does the Ministry of Magic acknowledge this?" "The Ministry of Magic doesn't acknowledge it," Moody said in a hoarse voice. "Centaurs are just one species living in the Forbidden Forest, but that doesn't mean the Forbidden Forest belongs to centaurs, or that anyone can come in. We wizards don't acknowledge this." Ralph stared at Bane with a deep, cold gaze, and chuckled softly. "Last time, an 8-eyed giant spider also told me that the Forbidden Forest belonged to them and even wanted to eat me, but it met a terrible end, being eaten by a fire dragon." "You'd better not say that either." Bane reached for the longbow on his back and said coldly, "Are you threatening me?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "I'm not threatening you, Mr. Centaur. I'm teaching you a lesson. If you keep talking about the Forbidden Forest being centaurs and waving that broken bow around in front of me, I'll kill you." Ralph smiled slightly. "See, that's a threat now. Do you know the difference?" A tense atmosphere instantly formed by the stream, swords drawn and the air thick with tension. Shirley grabbed Gabrielle's hand, pulling the little girl behind her to protect her. The students held their breath, watching this scene with bewildered expressions. Bane's face flushed crimson. He could no longer contain his anger. He gripped his longbow, drew an arrow from his quiver, nocked it, and aimed at Ralph. He drew the bow in a wide arc, and in a flash, the arrow shot out. The sharp arrow hurtled towards Ralph. In an instant, a dragon crystal dagger appeared in Ralph's hand. The young wizards and the centaurs only saw a dazzling black light flash in an arc, and upon closer inspection, they saw the arrow that had shot through the air with astonishing momentum severed in two. The half of the arrow, with its metal arrowhead, did not fall to the ground but floated in midair. The boy snapped his fingers lightly, and the arrow shot forward with incredible speed, heading straight for Bane. Bane knocked another arrow, intending to use his superior archery skills to deflect it. But the arrow suddenly changed direction in midair, dodging the obstruction and continuing towards Bane. Bane dodged quickly, but a bloody gash was still slashed across his cheek. The arrow embedded itself in a large tree, its tip trembling incessantly. Bane wiped the blood from his face. He was furious and suddenly drew his greatsword, intending to launch a charge, but the next second, he froze on the spot. Ralph crossed his arms, tapped his forefinger with his thumb, and uttered a single word, "Arrows." All the metal arrows in the centaur's quiver were pulled by an invisible force, floating in midair, densely packed and aimed at Bane. One arrow even hovered between Bane's eyebrows, ready to pierce his head at any moment. Bane was instantly terrified, a chill running down his spine, and he dared not move an inch. Everyone else was also stunned into silence, staring blankly at the scene. Chapter 578 The Centaur's Wooden Coffin. A dense barrage of arrows hovered in midair. This scene sent chills down the spines of not only the young wizards but also the centaurs watching, filling them with utter horror. Everyone had expected a thrilling battle, one that would be evenly matched, or at least a protracted struggle. But they never imagined that the seemingly aggressive Bane would be utterly powerless against Ralph, appearing as weak as a child. Everyone looked at Ralph with awe. The boy could have easily pierced Bane's heart with a single thought, but he didn't. Instead, he looked towards the dense forest and called out, "Chief Magri, you've been watching the show for quite a while now, aren't you going to say a few words?" The centaurs turned in shock, not expecting their chief to be there as well. A moment later, the sound of hooves arose, and a centaur walked towards them through the dappled green light. He had a haughty face with high cheekbones and long black hair, and on his back was a long bow and an empty quiver. Margaret looked at Bane, who was surrounded by arrows and dared not move, and sighed inwardly. Scamander was much more powerful than he had been 3 years ago, but he was still just a young colt. Wizards were truly terrifying creatures blessed with extraordinary abilities. Margaret sighed softly and said in a low voice, "Please spare his life, Scamander." Of course, Ralph wouldn't kill Bane. He and the centaurs hadn't reached the point of falling out, and besides, Nymeria was there was no need for him to kill Bane. But Ralph wasn't about to let it go so easily. He calmly said, "Chief Margaret, 3 years ago when we met, you asked me to forgive Bane, and I gave you face and spared his life. But he didn't learn his lesson and offended me again, and you ask me to release him again? That's unfair to honest people, Scamander. I promise this is the last time. If there's a next time, I will personally expel him from the tribe," Margaret said sternly. "At that time, whether he lives or dies will be up to fate, and it has nothing to do with the centaur tribe. Of course, I can't let you let him go so easily. As compensation, our tribe can help you collect some precious magical plants. Those are quite important to your wizards, aren't they?" Ralph, who had just been so murderous, instantly changed his expression upon hearing Margaret's offer of magical plants as compensation, reverting to his amiable demeanor. He smiled and said, "Chief Margaret, out of consideration for your relationship with my grandfather, I'll spare Bane. We're good friends, after all. There's really no need to make things so tense. By the way, Sherry," Ralph looked at the girl with the ponytail and asked, "you told me last time that the medicine storehouse was missing a few magical plants, and you wrote them down on parchment. Did you bring that piece of paper with you?" "Yes." Sherry took out her purse, pulled out a piece of parchment, and handed it to Ralph, also instinctively handing him a quill. The boy opened the parchment, somewhat displeased, and said, "There are too many herbs. What kind of relationship do I have with Chief Margaret? How can you take so much stuff? I'll cross some out." As Ralph spoke, he picked up the quill and added many more hard-to-find magical plants to the parchment, then gently waved his wand, and the parchment flew into Margaret's hand. Margaret genuinely thought Ralph was going to cross some out. But after glancing at the parchment, he almost vomited blood. "A whole parchment full of herbs? You've come to the Forbidden Forest to buy supplies, haven't you? What a cunning wizard." "There's one more thing," Ralph added. Margaret, suppressing her anger, asked, "What is it?" "Bane just said we're not allowed to enter the Forbidden Forest." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Is that so, Chief Margaret?" "Of course you can enter. We centaurs will never harm ponies," Margaret assured the students. "While you're in the Forbidden Forest for class, we'll drive away any overly dangerous magical creatures nearby. Consider it a small compensation to ensure your safety. How about it?" "Thank you then," Ralph said with a beaming smile. The tense atmosphere vanished without a trace, and the young wizards breathed a sigh of relief. Their gazes towards Ralph changed once again. The male students were very curious about the magic he had just used. What kind of magic could control so many arrows in an instant? The female students, however, had a slightly different perspective. They were captivated by Ralph's composure in the face of so many centaurs, his fearlessness, and his ability to maintain the upper hand. Their gazes towards Ralph were practically drooling. After the wizards had left, Margaret also dismissed the centaurs, leaving only him and Bane by the stream. Bane stumbled toward Margaret, his voice menacing. "I'll get my revenge," he snarled. "Haven't you caused enough trouble already?" he demanded. "But that guy was having an affair with Nymeria and gave her a lot of help," Bane retorted angrily. "Those magical items were given to you by Scamander. We saw it through divination, so what?" Margaret snapped. "Do you have any proof? Or have you caught them together?" "No matter what you say, Scamander won't admit it. I'm warning you again, don't treat him like a pony anymore. You're no match for him, you're just asking for trouble. Are you just going to let it go like this?" Bane roared. "Margaret, you're afraid of Scamander. You're terrified of wizards. You used to be fearless." "We should be afraid," Margaret said sternly. "Only by having fear can we survive in this dangerous world. Otherwise, what awaits you is a flock of crows. They've been circling over the forest, waiting for our corpses to feast on. I know wizards are extremely arrogant and rude, lacking even the most basic respect for centaurs," Margaret said sternly. "But you must also remember, they are powerful, possessing extraordinary talents." "Bane, you need to calm down. You can't think straight when you're filled with rage." "How can I calm down like this?" Bane pointed to his severed leg. "Right now, I only want to capture Nymeria." Margaret gazed at the frenzied Bane, and after a long while, sighed softly. "I will help you use that wooden coffin. With its powerful energy, I can accurately divine Nymeria's location. She can't escape." Bane was stunned. He was first overjoyed, then worried. Didn't you say before that using that wooden coffin would come at a price? Yes, there's a price, Margaret said calmly, looking at Bane. However, you will be the one paying the price. Chapter 579 Gabrielle's competitive spirit. After separating from the centaurs, the defense against the dark arts practical class proceeded without further incident, ending peacefully. Whether due to the difficulty of the lesson or the long hike, the students all looked exhausted. Gabrielle was no exception. The little girl was too tired to walk any further, so Ralph had to carry her on his back towards Hogwarts. The boy's back was soft and comfortable, making Gabrielle drowsy and sleepy. By the time they returned to the castle, she was fast asleep. However, Fleur was still teaching, so Ralph thought for a moment, then carried Gabrielle into the black box and into a wooden hut. Inside was a large bed. Ralph gently placed Gabrielle on the bed, carefully removing her outer garments and shoes, and covering her with a light blanket. After finishing his work, Ralph prepared to leave the room, but Gabrielle suddenly woke up. She sat up against the pillows, the blanket slipping down to her waist, and murmured, "Ralph, where am I?" "You're in my trunk," Ralph said. "Sleep well, I'll wake you up when it's time to eat." Gabrielle softly hummed in agreement and lay back down on the soft bed, but she didn't fall asleep. Instead, she murmured sleepily, "Ralph, can you talk to me for a while?" "I want to talk to you." Ralph nodded, sat down on the edge of the bed, and asked, "How was it? Weren't you scared in the Forbidden Forest today?" "No." Gabrielle shook her head, then honestly said, "Well, I was still a little scared when I saw those centaurs. They were all so fierce. Some centaurs are indeed hostile to wizards, but some are very friendly to us." Ralph chuckled. "I know, just like in the wizarding world, there are good guys and bad guys." Gabrielle blinked her sleepy, delicate eyes and asked, "So, do you know Bane's ex-fiancée?" "Yes," Ralph nodded. "Nymeria can tell fortunes, and she's used that to trade quite a few magical items with me." Of course, he used to ignore Nymeria, but since learning about the wooden coffin in the centaur tribe, he's decided to increase his cooperation with her. "So, you lied to Bane?" Gabrielle asked. "Yes," Ralph nodded in agreement. "Gabrielle, lying isn't good, and I don't want to lie either. But sometimes, when dealing with people who are hostile to us, we can't tell the whole truth. That's how we protect ourselves, right?" "Yes, you're right." The little girl's eyes darted around, a mischievous glint in them. "Last time I accidentally broke a flower pot, and if I had lied to my hostile mother and said it was my father, I definitely wouldn't have gotten scolded." "Ralph, I'll do as you say from now on." Ralph scratched his head. He seemed to have led Gabrielle astray. Just as he was about to explain, he saw the little girl's mischievous and adorable gaze and understood. Gabrielle understood everything. She was just deliberately twisting Ralph's meaning to make him anxious. Rove gently flicked her nose, scolding, "Don't say strange things. If your sister hears you, she'll think I'm leading you astray." "No way. My sister loves you the most." Gabrielle giggled, then asked curiously, "Where did Sherry go?" "She's feeding Mrs. Maxim's magical horse malt whiskey?" Gabrielle asked enviously. "Rove, can I, like Sherry, take care of those magical creatures in your trunk?" "You're still too young?" Rove shook his head. "We'll talk about it when you're older." "I'm not young anymore." "Not at all." Gabrielle puffed out her flat chest, speaking seriously. "Sherry became your assistant when she was 11, and I'm 9 now, only 2 years apart." "But you don't understand anything," Rove said. "Who says I don't know?" Gabrielle glanced out the window, made a cute gesture to lean closer, and whispered, "Ralph, I'll tell you a little secret." Ralph curiously moved closer, and the little girl sat up, pressing her cheek against the boy's ear, whispering, "I've been secretly studying with my sister's old magical creature protection textbook. I finished 3rd grade material and started 4th grade studies. I'll catch up with Sherry soon." Gabrielle nervously glanced out the window, and after not seeing Sherry, she continued, "This little secret is only between the two of us. You absolutely can't tell Sherry, otherwise she'll definitely study harder, and I might not be able to catch up with her." "I won't tell Sherry," Ralph promised, then asked doubtfully, "Is catching up with her important?" "Of course it is." Gabrielle pouted and huffed. "Once I catch up with her, I'll be qualified to be your assistant. Sherry wants a salary, but I don't. You just need to provide food and lodging." Ralph chuckled. "A mere little assistant, and he could manage that?" The little girl tugged at Ralph's sleeve, pouting. "Is it really okay?" Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Gabrielle, the magical creatures protection class is a practical one. It requires interaction with magical creatures. Just reading textbooks is merely theoretical. It doesn't have much practical effect. Is that so? Gabrielle looked surprised. She thought just reading books would suffice. Yes, Ralph nodded. And Sherry, although only a fourth-year student, is far beyond that level in the field of magical creatures. She knows all the magical creatures in my box, their preferences, their habitats, their food, and she can even treat them and deliver babies. Gabrielle's mouth gaped open, speechless with astonishment. Seeing that the little girl was quite upset and looked very sad, Rove comforted her. It's okay. Sherry doesn't know nearly as much as you do at your age. When you're her age, you'll definitely know more than her. Gabrielle sighed knowingly, biting her lip. But when I'm 14, Sherry will still have studied for 5 more years than me. Why do you have to compare yourself to Sherry? Rove chuckled. Because she's your assistant, and so pretty, Gabrielle muttered. If I want to take her place, I have to be better than her. Rove smiled, reaching out to ruffle Gabrielle's hair. The little girl protested. Don't touch my head. It'll stunt my growth. Rove laughed heartily. You're already much taller than your peers. How much taller do you want to be? Gabrielle stood on the bed, tapping Rove's head with her chin, and huffed. Anyway, I have to be taller than Sherry. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 580 Trelawney's Prophecy. Ever since Gabrielle met Ralph in the May issue last summer and followed him into the box, she'd been dreaming of becoming his assistant. Gabrielle used to be confident, feeling she had little competition and that she could simply wait until she grew into a young woman to find Ralph and move in with him. But after arriving at Hogwarts and meeting Sherry, her confidence waned. A sense of crisis arose, and Gabrielle began openly and subtly competing with Sherry, hoping to seize the opportunity before Sherry's position was secure and complete her grand usurpation. Sherry was also keenly aware of this, but she remained completely unfazed, letting Gabrielle compete, displaying an unyielding composure. Gabrielle was repeatedly crushed by Sherry in matters of confidence, leaving her feeling humiliated, and now she exhibited a melancholy beyond her years. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be comparing heights. After the defense against the dark arts class ended, news of what happened in the Forbidden Forest quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. The descriptions of Ralph Scamander's swift defeat of the Centaur were all similar, and the students weren't particularly interested. They were more concerned with whether Ralph and Bane's ex-fiancée were alright. Besides the Centaur, the students' attention was also focused on the upcoming Triwizard Tournament. But the discussion wasn't about the first event. Instead, they were debating which champion truly represented Hogwarts. If there were only one champion, there would be no debate, but now there were 5, so naturally, they had to argue who was the true heir and who was the despicable heretic. Thus, Hogwarts split up by house, entering a massive internal power struggle. The Hufflepuff students, of course, supported Ralph. They worked through the night to create badges, all bearing the same inscription, each golden letter gleaming like fire: support Ralph Scamander, the true champion of Hogwarts. When the badge was pressed firmly against the chest, the inscription disappeared, and then a honey badger appeared. Every Hufflepuff student pinned their badge to their uniform, and they enthusiastically discussed every day what pose to strike when Ralph won. They practically opened the champagne Ralph wouldn't dare, and performed the celebrations Ralph wouldn't dare. Ravenclaw was equally ambitious, creating bronze hats adorned with a large eagle. Whenever a student approached, the eagle would softly proclaim, "Shirley Swinton will win." Gryffindor faced a dilemma, as their 3 champions were divided on who to support. The Lion Cubs split in 2, the boys supported Harry, while the girls chose Hermione. And what about Ron? He was completely ignored by the Gryffindor students. Even the twins and Ginny thought he was just there for laughs. Of course, there were also students jealous of Ron, like Malfoy. He truly wanted to replace Ron, become a champion alongside Harry, and compete with him, but for now, it was the Weasleys who enjoyed it all. Besides the students, the professors were also inevitably affected, paying varying degrees of attention to the upcoming Triwizard Tournament. Professor McGonagall began intentionally reducing the warriors' homework, allowing them ample rest. Professor Flitwick also hinted in class that, as a former fighting champion, he could help the warriors with their combat training. Only Professor Snape went further, deliberately picking fights several times. attempting to confine warriors from other houses. Trelawney also began her daily performance. Halfway through divination class, she suddenly put down the star chart in her hand, staring intently at Ralph with a look of someone staring at a dead man. Ralph didn't want to pay attention to Trelawney, but seeing her staring at him, he had no choice but to say helplessly, "Professor, is something wrong?" "I'm fine, but you seem troubled, my dear," Trelawney said sadly to Ralph. "My spiritual gaze, passing through your handsome face, sees the restless soul within you." "I am not restless," Ralph said. "Don't hide your fragile heart." Trelawney stared at Rove and sighed. "Child, I regret to inform you that your worries are not unfounded. I see your days ahead filled with hardship, very difficult. I fear what you fear will truly come, perhaps sooner than you imagine." Many looked at Rove with alarmed eyes. Professor Trelawney floated past them and sat down in a large, winged armchair by the fire, facing the class. "What did you see, Professor?" "Was it about the Triwizard Tournament?" Hannah asked softly. "Yes," Trelawney's voice trailed off, finally becoming a whisper. "Last night, I gazed at the night sky and saw Mars shining, like a wound on the crimson canvas, gushing blood. This is very unusual. As I told you, human destiny can be deciphered through the movements of planets and the radiation they emit. Of course, only those who understand the rules of the celestial dance can unravel its mysteries. You all have much to learn." They exchanged glances. Justin couldn't help but raise his hand, questioning, "But it was raining last night, all night long." "Professor Trelawney, how did you see Mars through the thick clouds?" Trelawney seemed offended, glaring at Justin fiercely, her voice hoarse. "Child, you have mortal eyes, but I have celestial eyes. Although we look up at the same starry sky, we see different things." Trelawney looked out the window, her voice becoming ethereal and dreamlike. "I saw the Aitken crater at the moon's south pole, Olympia and Canyon of Mariners on Mars, Jupiter's Great Red Plate, and the icy geysers of Saturn's second moon." Ralph thought to himself, "This is such a huge exaggeration. Why don't you just say you can traverse black holes with your bare hands and leave your footprints on planets billions of light years away?" Ralph sighed softly. Trelawney hadn't fully inherited Cassandra's divination talent, but she had certainly perfected her talent for boasting. What a misfortune for the family. Seeing Ralph's indifferent expression, Trelawney scoffed. "I think some of us are better off not participating in the Triwizard Tournament." Trelawney stared at Ralph meaningfully, her voice low and mysterious. "This competition will be filled with death." Hannah and Susan both covered their mouths, their expressions terrified. Just then, there was a sudden, urgent knocking at the door. Chapter 581 Karkaroff and Malfoy. The door opened quickly, and two girls walked in, Sherry and Hermione. The students, recognizing the newcomers, all turned to look at Ralph. Needless to say, they were there to see him. Trelawney smiled, a rare sight, when she saw Sherry. The two had watched the Quidditch World Cup final together from a box and even ridden together on a dragon. She liked this gentle girl very much. However, upon seeing Hermione, Trelawney's expression quickly hardened. They had a disagreement in class, and Hermione had even given up divination. Trelawney didn't particularly like this little McGonagall. "Professor Trelawney, I'm sorry to interrupt your class," Shirley said politely. "All the warriors are going to the main tower now. We came to inform Ralph, Scamander." "Oh, I see." Trelawney's large eyes looked at Ralph, and she waved her hand, saying, "Go on, child. Don't forget what I just told you, be careful." The students looked at Ralph with envy. He didn't have to attend class, how wonderful. But seeing Trelawney's expression, their envy vanished immediately. Was it wonderful? Was it freedom? It was earned with their lives. Ralph quickly packed his textbooks, picked up his suitcase, and followed Shirley and Hermione out of the classroom. Walking down the stairs, he chuckled. "I'm saved." "What's wrong?" Shirley asked. "Is that even a question?" Hermione scoffed. "It must be that Trelawney just predicted someone would die in the Triwizard Tournament, and she specifically mentioned you, right?" Ralph chuckled. "That's right, I knew it." Hermione let out a short, mocking laugh. "Trelawney's tricks have been played too many times, they're sick and tired of it. I really don't know why Professor Dumbledore kept her as a teacher, Hermione. Professor Trelawney may be unreliable most of the time, but occasionally, by chance, she enters the realm of true prophecy," Ralph explained for Dumbledore. "That's why the headmaster kept her. Don't be so hostile towards her." Of course, another reason was that Trelawney made a prophecy about Harry and Voldemort. If she left Hogwarts, it would be too dangerous. Sooner or later, Voldemort would come after her. Hermione raised her eyebrows, looking very skeptical, clearly not believing that Trelawney had any real prophetic abilities, even if only occasionally. This isn't actually uncommon in the Trelawney family, Ralph said quickly. I asked Cassandra, and she said it's called incomplete awakening of the third eye, caused by impure bloodlines. Impure bloodlines, that's right, Ralph nodded. Like Parseltongue, the third eye is an innate ability, a manifestation of power brought by one's bloodline, and it's basically impossible to learn later. A pure blood wizard with this bloodline power will have their bloodline become impure and the power will decline if they marry a muggle. Hufflepuff once said that when a pure blood wizard marries a muggle, the third generation of offspring will lack that special power, and in the fourth generation, there might even be a squib. Professor Trelawney isn't pure-blooded, her bloodline is impure, which is why her third eye is sometimes effective and sometimes not. Why does this happen? Sherry asked, puzzled. This is a conspiracy against the wizarding race, Ralph said in a deep voice. If pure-blood wizards want to maintain their purity, they must intermarry with other pure-bloods. But pure-blood wizards are cursed to reproduce, and if they continue to intermarry, their bloodline will eventually die out in a certain generation. If they don't want to perish, they must intermarry with muggles, but the power of that bloodline will disappear, and wizards will eventually be assimilated by muggles until the entire race is completely wiped out. The three walked along the road and began to talk about purebloods and the wizarding curse. Sherry and Hermione had heard Ralph mention it briefly before, but this time, understanding it completely, they were both shocked. They quickly left the North Tower and arrived at the main castle. When they reached the second floor, Ralph suddenly stopped and looked into the distance. Headmaster Karkaroff was standing by the window in the corridor, and beside him was another wizard, Lucius Malfoy. The two were whispering to each other. Karkaroff looked very frightened and uneasy. After glancing at Ralph, he immediately shut his mouth. Headmaster Karkaroff, what a coincidence, running into you here. Ralph strode over, glancing at Malfoy and smiling slightly. What, chatting with a former colleague? The word former colleague made Karkaroff's lips twitch. Compared to Lucius, he was indeed a former colleague, and the kind who reported his former company's employees for tax evasion before he switched jobs. We were just talking about transferring schools, Karkaroff said, chuckling, but his cold eyes held no mirth. Lucius wants to transfer his son. Oh, I see, Malfoy immediately replied, his light-colored eyes darting around before settling on Sherry and Hermione. Hogwarts has too much mud. Seeing Ralph fiddling with his wand, he immediately changed his tune. Of all the mediocre teachers, I still think Durmstrang is much better. Looks like Draco warned you not to say anything in front of me. Ralph twirled his wand lightly, chuckling. He's used similar words before, but I reprimanded him a few times, so he hasn't dared to say them again. If you dare bully Draco again, I won't be polite. Malfoy's face instantly darkened. Your son and I are friends, we get along very well. How could I possibly bully him? Ralph smiled. Your son is the one who likes to bully others. I just helped you discipline him a little. I can handle it myself. You don't need to meddle. That's hard to say. Ralph shrugged. Malfoy, since you're here, you must be preparing to participate in the Triwizard Tournament according to the Goblet of Fire contract, right? This tournament is very dangerous. Warriors often die. My divination professor just saw with his divine eye that many people will die this time. Ralph's sapphire-like eyes were fixed on Malfoy. I'm not cursing you, nor am I threatening you, but I'm reminding you. The boy leaned forward, hissing in Malfoy's ear, and your Death Eater companions, be careful, don't die in this Triwizard Tournament, or you'll have to rely on others to raise your wife and son. After Ralph finished speaking, he left with Sherry and Hermione. Malfoy stood frozen in place, his back drenched in cold sweat, a strong wind blowing, chilling him to the bone. Thanks to Vanes and 130th for their generous donations. Chapter 582 You Vixen, how dare you steal my man? Ralph's warning to Malfoy and the other Death Eaters to be careful and not die in the Triwizard Tournament wasn't just a verbal threat, he genuinely intended to kill them at Hogwarts. Voldemort had many henchmen, but only a handful of wizards could bear the dark mark on their arms and truly be considered Death Eaters. These individuals were, without exception, Voldemort's core foundation team, the very heart of the Death Eaters. If Voldemort were to resurrect, these escaped Death Eaters would inevitably return to his ranks. For such a group of war criminals who had escaped legal punishment and posed a significant threat, It was better to eliminate them now than to expend effort killing them or be killed by them when war resumed. Ralph intended to use the Triwizard Tournament to wipe out these escapees. When Voldemort resurrected and used the Dark Mark to summon his servants, he would finally experience what it meant to be, hey, where are they? As for murder being illegal, who broke the law? Isn't death normal in the Triwizard Tournament? This is because your Ministry of Magic didn't do a good job with security. Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione quickly arrived at a classroom. Pushing open the door, they saw a considerable number of students already gathered inside, 5 champions each from Boxburtons and Durmstrang, chatting in groups from their respective schools. Except for Fleur and Crumb, everyone else looked very happy. How could they not be? They hadn't thought they'd become champions, but unexpectedly, a few more spots had been added. Who says there's no such thing as a free lunch? They'd caught one. As for whether it was a windfall or a trap, Ralph couldn't say, only hoping their smiles would last until the end of the competition. Ludo sat in a chair, chatting with a woman dressed in a bright red robe and with extremely flamboyant makeup. Upon seeing Ralph, the two immediately stood up and walked towards him. Ludo smiled broadly and said, "Ralph, we have experts coming to inspect the Warriors ones later to see if they are fully functional and in good working order, to prevent any malfunctions during the competition. I'm very sorry to have taken up your class time. It's the Ministry of Magic's responsibility to us." Ralph smiled. "Is it Mr. Ollivander who's here to inspect them?" "That's right." Ludo nodded and introduced, "Ralph, this is Rita Skeeter. She's a famous journalist, you should have heard of her." "Right, not only have I heard of her, but I've also met her." Rita immediately giggled. "Ralph and I had a small, one-on-one interview at the German Ministry of Magic. It seems Ms. Skeeter was quite satisfied with that meeting." Ralph glanced at Rita, a slight smile playing on his lips. "If there's a chance, we can do it a few more times." Rita's face immediately stiffened. That day in the restroom, she had been thoroughly ravaged by Ralph. It wasn't a pleasant experience. Mr. Scamander, I have permission to conduct this interview," Rita said immediately. "The Ministry of Magic has full permission. You can ask Mr. Bagman if you don't believe me." "That's right," Ludo nodded. "Rita is writing a short article about the tournament for the Daily Prophet and needs to interview the champions at Hogwarts." "That's wonderful," Ralph smiled. "With Ms. Skeeter's brilliant writing, I look forward to the next issue of the Daily Prophet. So, you've given me permission to interview you?" Rita's eyes lit up immediately. "No. I mean, you can interview other warriors, but not me." Ralph stared into Rita's eyes and said softly, "If your report includes my name and fabricates stories about me, I'll show you what journalistic integrity is." Rita's face turned pale. She gripped her crocodile skin handbag with her thick, fleshy fingers and forced a smile. "You don't need to be so hostile towards me, Mr. Scamander. My journalism is always known for its accuracy." "Is that so?" Ralph chuckled. "If I remember correctly, a few months ago, in your report on the International Wizarding Federation Conference, you described Professor Dumbledore as a rigid old madman." Rita frowned and looked at Ludo pleadingly, hoping he would put in a good word for her. But Ludo, seeing that Ralph seemed to dislike Rita, dared not speak well of her. If he hadn't wanted to avoid offending Rita and fearing she would write articles spreading rumors about him, he would have already distanced himself from Ralph, saying he and Rita were no longer acquainted. There was no way around it. Ever since that day in Crouch's tent, when he witnessed Ralph capture Crouch and his son, Ludo had held this young man in awe. "And what if I were to interview you, Mr. Scamander?" A soft, alluring voice suddenly rang out. "Would you refuse?" Ralph turned around and saw a tall, stunningly beautiful young woman approaching. He paused, then said, "Margaery, what are you doing here?" Margaery wore a black pencil skirt, a favorite among working women, barely concealing her shapely midsection, paired with a sophisticated white blouse, a simple yet classic black and white combination. Thick, wavy blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore frameless gold-rimmed glasses, giving her a sophisticated, mature look. This alluring and captivating witch, appearing in the room, immediately drew the students' attention. Sherry and Hermione also happily gathered around Margaery. Margaret pulled a press pass from her pocket, waved it proudly, and said, "I'm a reporter from the New York Ghost. Dumbledore allowed me in for an interview." Ralph was speechless. "An American reporter coming to a British magic school for an interview? Huh? I'll interview you two later." Margaret winked at Sherry and Hermione. "I'll interview Mr. Scamander first." Margaret walked straight to Ralph, and in full view of everyone, wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, affectionately pulling him towards the next room. The group of warriors all looked on with extreme envy. They were warriors too, why weren't they being interviewed? Rita, seeing this, was immediately furious. Ralph, as the recipient of the Order of Merlin First Class for capturing Peter Pettigrew, saving the floating dragon ship, and possessing 2 Orders of Merlin, was incredibly popular, not only in the British wizarding world but throughout the entire world. Rita had wanted to ride on Ralph's coattails for a long time, but had never had the chance. A few months ago in Germany, she finally managed to get a chance to chat, but was brutally humiliated by Rove. She thought Scamander genuinely refused any interviews, but now a beautiful vixen had appeared out of nowhere, beckoning him away with a flick of her finger. This vixen dared to steal her man. Scamander was a tempting little cake. Rita had long considered him her own. She couldn't touch him, lick him, or bite him, and she absolutely wouldn't allow any other woman to have a taste. Rita licked her lips. Watching Rove and the vixen's retreating figures, a chilling smile spreading across her face. Chapter 583 Margaret's Serious Interview. 19-year-old Margaret not only inherited Queenie's striking beauty but also possessed an exceptionally tall figure. Wearing high heels, she was a full head taller than Rove. Margaret dragged the nearly suffocating Rove, opened the door to the next room, pushed him inside, and followed him in. Then, she waved her wand, magically locking the door from the inside. Rove rubbed his cheek, which was sore from being pinched, and found the room pitch black. He snapped his fingers, and a ball of flame appeared, its flickering light dispelling the darkness. It was a small cubicle for storing brooms. The space was cramped, just enough for one person, but a bit crowded for 2. "Why did you drag me here?" Rove asked. "I'm a reporter, of course I'm going to interview you." Margaret sat elegantly on the only stool, swinging her long, slender, fair legs, and said with a smile, "It's a bit cramped here, not easy for us to have an in-depth conversation. If you don't mind, you can sit on my lap." "I mind." Rove plopped down on a cardboard box, listening to the sounds outside the door, and warned, "Don't you dare do anything reckless. The soundproofing here isn't good. If someone hears us, they'll think we're doing something else, so what if they hear? We're having a proper interview." Margaret giggled, then suddenly her expression changed, and she covered herself with her hands, looking pitiful. "Rove, you're not implying that you want to have an inappropriate interview or try to sexually harass me, are you?" Rove rolled his eyes. "It's not impossible." Margaret propped her chin up with one hand, looking at Ralph with a seductive smile. "I recently taught myself belly dancing. How about I perform a routine for you to get some energy before the final 3 competition?" "Don't be silly." Ralph glared at her. "Really not going to watch?" Margaret put on a pitiful, hurt expression, her soft, alluring voice filled with resentment. "Looks like you think I'm too old. I'm definitely not as pretty as a 14 or 15-year-old girl. I'll teach Sherry and Hermione later, and they can perform for you." Ralph couldn't withstand Margaret's suggestive words and quickly changed the subject. "Seriously, you probably offended Rita Skeeter just now." Rita had tried to interview Ralph several times but was ruthlessly rejected. Frustrated and angry, she undoubtedly resented him. And Margaret, as a fellow professional, had so easily pulled Ralph away. She would definitely be resented by Rita as well. "I've heard of Rita Skeeter, a journalist who mainly spreads rumors, likes to create gender antagonism, and lives off human blood." Margaret crossed her legs, lightly twirling her high heels with her toes, and said nonchalantly, "So what if I offend her? She can just write some articles to criticize me, right? I can write articles to criticize her too. More than that." Rove shook his head. "She'll dig up dirt on you, pry into your privacy, and in extreme cases, she might even secretly photograph you and use those despicable methods to threaten you." "Are you sure she has that ability?" Margaret narrowed her eyes. "If you're not careful enough, she definitely does have that ability," Rove said softly. "Rita Skeeter is actually an illegal animagus. She can transform into a beetle and secretly infiltrate other people's bodies. If you're not on guard, it's very difficult to detect her. She's an illegal animagus." Margaret's eyes lit up instantly, gleaming in the dimly lit cubicle. No wonder she always manages to drop so much juicy gossip so quickly. So that's how she does it. "Interesting, really interesting," she chuckled. "Rolf, this old woman has piqued my interest. What do you want to do, play around with her?" Margaret stretched, placing her legs together on Rolf's knees. From the side, her long, shapely legs and pert buttocks were undeniably alluring. "I thought going back to England would be boring, But I didn't expect to find such a fun guy here." Seeing Margaret smile, Ralph silently mourned for Rita for 3 seconds, since nothing good ever happened when she showed that smile. But then again, bad people always have their match, so this was a good thing for the British press. Rove reached out and pressed down on Margaret's restless feet, stopping her from moving, and asked, "Why did you suddenly come to England?" Margaret had always hated the British weather, so after the Quidditch World Cup, she went to America with Newt and Tina. There was no reason for her to come back specifically for some ridiculous interview. "What, you don't welcome me?" Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Afraid I'll bother you at Hogwarts, flirting with the girls at Durmstrang and Volksplittens?" Rove didn't respond, but asked directly, "It's not really related to the True Wizard Tournament, is it?" "Want to know?" The boy nodded. Margaret didn't answer, but instead feigned a sob. "I came to see you in high heels, and my legs are a little sore from walking all the way. It would be nice if someone could massage my legs and feet." Rove sighed helplessly and could only reach out to massage and knead Margaret's soft, warm legs. He had been forced to do this by Margaret many times before, so his technique was professional and skillful. Margaret smiled charmingly. "I came back with my grandfather. Dumbledore wrote to him asking him to come to Hogwarts." Dumbledore wrote a letter. Ralph narrowed his eyes, puzzled. "Is it to guard against those Death Eaters?" This kind of thing could be left to the Order of the Phoenix. Newt wouldn't need to get involved, would he? "It's not about the Death Eaters, but about your competition," Margaret said. "Dumbledore said that dozens of warriors have appeared this time, and there aren't enough magical creatures for the first competition. Dumbledore wants my grandfather to come and get some magical creatures from his trunk to help replenish the supplies. Isn't that a bit much?" Ralph asked, puzzled. Even if transporting dragons from Romania wouldn't take enough time, there are plenty of dragons in England, aren't there? There are dragon reserves in the UK, inhabited by Welsh green dragons and Hebrides black dragons. While there might be some overlap, that's more than enough to guarantee one dragon per warrior. Newt doesn't actually have that many dragons in his chest, so there's no need for him to help replenish them. "Who told you the first project is just dragons?" Margaret chuckled. "Grandpa's here, so the magical creatures he's prepared are bound to be a mixed bag. Tonight at midnight, I'll take you to see the magical creatures you'll be facing. In short, many of them are animals you've never even seen before." Chapter 584 The Shocking Hibiscus. Ralph had assumed the first project would be another fire dragon, but he hadn't expected that his actions would cause a change in the magical creature. This was indeed unexpected. However, whether the first project was a fire dragon or a water dragon, it didn't matter much to Ralph. It had virtually no impact. After arranging a meeting place with Margaret, Ralph was kept in a small cubicle for quite a while before finally returning to his room. At that moment, Ollivander was sitting behind a table, checking the wands of the warriors. Fortunately, only 2 Durmstrang students hadn't had their wands checked yet, and Ralph, who was behind them in line, didn't have to wait long before it was his turn. Ollivander took the boy's wand, twirling it between his slender fingers like a conductor's baton. Then he brought the wand close to his eyes, examining it carefully, and finally couldn't help but frown. "What's wrong, Mr. Ollivander?" Ralph asked. "Judging from the craftsmanship," Ollivander said softly, stroking the wand with his long, pale fingers, "this is undoubtedly a product of Grigorovich." "That's right," Ralph nodded. "When I went to Germany this summer, Mr. Grigorovich made this wand for me." "Is there anything wrong with it?" Ralph had previously used a Thunderbird feather wand made by the North American wandmaker Jacoba Wolf, which he found quite comfortable. But since using Grigorovich's wand, he discovered that its spell-casting power far surpassed that of the Thunderbird feather wand, so he discarded it and replaced it with this one. Of course, the only problem was that it wasn't as comfortable to use, but in Grigorovich's words, the wizard chooses the wand. With time, the wand would naturally become compatible with the wizard. 11 inches, the heart and nerves of a dragon, but the wood of this wand, Ollivander frowned. "Chestnut wood," Ralph said. Mr. Grigovich said chestnut wood is the most inquisitive of woods, especially suitable for skilled magical creature trainers, which suits me perfectly. "That's right, chestnut wood does have that characteristic," Ollivander nodded. "But the chestnut wood I've seen has a light chestnut or light reddish-brown heartwood and a light grayish-brown sapwood, with a fairly clear grain. This wand, however, is ivory-colored. I've never seen chestnut wood this color before." "Really?" Ralph asked, puzzled. Ollivander waved his wand. Blazing flame, the wand made a loud bang, startling all the students in the classroom. Then, a large ball of flame leaped high, reaching the ceiling and blackening it completely. "That's incredibly powerful," Ollivander exclaimed, then added in surprise, "I've used Grigorovich's wand before. His wands are indeed more powerful than others, but not to this extent, Mr. Scamander, if possible, could I take this wand back with me to study it for a few days?" Ollivander asked, his eyes sparkling. "I can provide you with a spare wand free of charge. I personally have no objection," Ralph said, "but you must first obtain Mr. Grigorovich's permission." "All right." Ollivander looked quite disappointed. After the wand testing was completed, Dumbledore stood up beside the judge's table. "Now you can go back to class, or you can go straight to the Great Hall for lunch. They'll be dismissed soon anyway." Of course, no one wanted to go back to class at this hour. Just as the students were heading to the Great Hall, Ludo excitedly shouted, "Take a picture. Dumbledore. Take a picture. What do you think of a group photo of the judges and the champions?" Of course, Dumbledore nodded. Ralph found Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur in the crowd. The three girls were chatting together. "Ralph, what were Mr. Ollivander talking to you about just now?" Sherry asked with concern. "He looked very serious. He said there's something wrong with the material of my wand." Ralph quickly recounted what had just happened, adding, "I'm going to write to Karen to ask." Karen was Gregoric's granddaughter. She would definitely know what was going on. Sherry narrowed her eyes, suddenly remembering something, and guessed, could this chestnut wood also come from Avalon? "That's right," Hermione nodded. "The trees there, both in color and texture, are different from our trees." Ralph also seemed thoughtful. "That's a possibility. Judging from the elderberry, apple, and olive trees they had encountered, they were indeed different from ordinary trees. If that were the case, it meant that Gregoric had also been to Avalon and even brought back a seed." Fleur looked at the three of them, confused. She couldn't understand what they were saying at all. The warriors, under the photographer's direction, began to take their positions. The photographer was particularly keen to have Sherry and Fleur, the two most beautiful witches, stand in the front, but they both refused, joining Ron in the last row. Rita pulled Harry to the most prominent position, and Ron benefited from it, standing in the center for the first time, looking very excited. What excited Ron the most was that Rita had just interviewed him. Although most of the questions were about Harry, Rita said she would write a story about the two of them. Anyway, he would definitely be on the front page of the next issue. His first time on the front page of the Daily Prophet. Who else could do that? Ron couldn't wait to see the new paper. He would buy 7 or 8 copies, send them home, keep one for himself, and give 2 to George and 2 to Fred. Of course, he would also give a copy to that smug Percy, making him incredibly envious. Standing in the last row, Ron cast a spell to make their voices inaudible, and then began talking about Marjorie. "Marjorie has gone back," Ralph said. "But she wants me to come out tonight to see the details of the first event in the Triwizard Tournament." "Why don't you come along?" Sherry and Hermione nodded, while Fleur raised an eyebrow. "Is that okay? Isn't it cheating?" "Of course, Fleur," Ralph chuckled. "Cheating is a traditional virtue in the Triwizard Tournament. In a few days, all the Durmstrang champions will know the details of the first event. If you don't, you'll be at a disadvantage." "But going out at midnight, isn't that a night stroll?" Fleur bit her lip, puzzled. "You can go out at night at Hogwarts." "Of course not," Sherry shook her head. "As long as you don't get caught." "Yeah, we've never been caught," Hermione said. "Ralph and Sherry often go to the Forbidden Forest at night." Fleur looked at Sherry and Hermione, then at the composed Ralph, secretly alarmed. What kind of students are these? Chapter 585 Luofu, Madam, I'm taking Fu Rong for a run. It was late at night, and the bedroom was pitch black and silent. Fleur lay in bed, not asleep, but staring at the ceiling, quietly waiting for the appointed time to arrive. She was going on a night out with Ralph soon, and the thought filled her with a mixture of unease and excitement. The unease stemmed from the fact that a night out violated school rules, and Fleur, always a model student, had never done anything so outrageous. But it was precisely because she had never done it before that she couldn't suppress her excitement and eagerly anticipated her upcoming first time, with Ralph no less. It was simply wonderful. Of course, Fleur's only slight dissatisfaction was that Sherry and Hermione would be going too, if it were just the two of them, not 4. Fleur glanced at her watch, and seeing that it was almost time, she quietly sat up. Gabrielle nestled beside her, one hand resting lightly on her chest, breathing evenly and gently. Fleur carefully slipped away from her sister's embrace and got out of bed. Gabrielle murmured sleepily as she did so, but she wasn't disturbed, which relieved Fleur. For some reason, Fleur suddenly remembered her own childhood. Every night, her mother would sleep with her first, but the next morning, she would be in her father's room. Several times, Fleur, half asleep, heard her father ask, "Is the child asleep?" And her mother would say, "Don't move, she's not sound asleep yet." Looking at the sleeping Gabrielle, and thinking about her own journey to find Ralph, Fleur inexplicably felt, this moment was truly just like that moment. By the faint light of the embers in the fireplace, Fleur quickly changed her clothes, still wrapped in a thick cloak. She opened the door, listened intently for a moment, and then stepped out of the room. Along a long corridor, Fleur walked towards the carriage door. On both sides were walls made of milky white marble with blue veins, with iron pedestals holding torches. The thick carpet embroidered with two crossed gold wands muffled her footsteps as Fleur silently approached the doorway. She gently knocked on a wooden door made of ebony, which opened without a sound. She took a step forward, then another, and the door closed automatically behind her. Fleur jumped down from the carriage. She didn't see Ralph, but she saw the dark castle, the empty square, and the boundless starry sky. A half-moon climbed up behind the tower. Hogwarts at night was truly tranquil and beautiful. Just then, a whistle sounded from the sky. Fleur looked up and saw Ralph floating in midair, with Sherry and Hermione each riding a flying broomstick beside him. The three were waving at her, and Fleur grinned, immediately waving back. Sherry landed a broomstick beside the carriage, and Fleur sat on her back, soaring into the sky. As the four reunited and were about to leave, a window in the carriage suddenly opened, and Madame Maxim appeared beside it. She wore a large purple brocade nightgown, adorned with pearls and silver thread, her long hair disheveled and cascading down her back, though the strands were matted from sleep. Maxim immediately spotted the four in the sky, her eyes widening. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed. "Madame Maxim, it's so late, aren't you asleep yet?" Ralph chuckled. "We couldn't sleep either, so we came out for a walk." "The weather's lovely tonight, you're out for a walk with three girls in the middle of the night." Maxim glared at Ralph with hostility. The carriage door was enchanted, she could sense when someone was out at night. Then Maxim opened the window to see who it was, only to witness this scene. Bringing one girl out in the middle of the night was already outrageous, but Ralph had brought three. It was truly heinous. And one of the girls was her most prized and beloved student. Maxim had painstakingly nurtured Fleur for 6 years, bringing her to Hogwarts, and in less than 2 weeks, this brat had managed to seduce her into a nighttime stroll. If Ralph couldn't provide a reasonable explanation, Maxim would surely break 3 of his legs, depriving him of the means to continue his illicit activities with girls. "Don't misunderstand, I was taking them to check out the first event of the Triwizard Tournament," Ralph quickly explained. "These things have to be kept secret and discreet, right? The first event of the Triwizard Tournament." Maxim paused, then asked, "Is that so, Fleur?" "Yes, Mrs. Maxim," Fleur replied honestly. "Ralph, how did you know about the first event?" Maxim asked. Ralph didn't mention Margaret, only vaguely stating, "I have an acquaintance in the Department of Physical Education at the Ministry of Magic, in charge of preparing the first event. She asked me to meet her tonight, and then she'd take us to see what we'd be dealing with." "Oh, I see," Maxim pondered. If that was the case, it was indeed understandable. Seeing that the headmaster remained silent, Fleur said anxiously, "Mrs. Maxim, please don't blame Ralph, I forced him to take me." Maxim couldn't help but sigh. What a silly girl. She'd be sold out and still have to count the galleons for them. "All right, you can go now, Ralph. I won't blame you for taking Fleur out at night," Mrs. Maxim said with a smile. "However, I have a condition." "What condition?" "You have to take me with you," Mrs. Maxim said slyly, "and the other 4 warriors from our school, let them all go and have a look." "Ralph, we're so close, you can't favor one over the other." "All right, I'm going to change my clothes," Maxim warned. "Don't even think about running away, I can see you through the window." Maxim calmly returned to the window and closed it. "What do we do?" Fleur asked, her face contorted with worry. "Run," Ralph said. "It'll be too conspicuous to have so many people around." He had just accidentally seen Maxim changing clothes. If they met again later, it would be embarrassing, and he might even get his leg broken. "As for the first project, we can come back and tell Mrs. Maxim after you've seen it." Ralph flew off first, with Sherry and Hermione following closely behind on their brooms. When Maxim finished changing and opened the window, she found no one outside. She yelled angrily, "Scamander, you just wait." Chapter 586 Monster Hunter. Margaret and Rove agreed to meet at Black Lake at midnight. Rove was initially puzzled. Black Lake was so vast, how would he find her without knowing her exact location? But as he approached the lake, he realized it was indeed obvious. After all, a fire dragon over 10 meters long was hovering above Black Lake. Even someone with poor eyesight could see it. At that moment, Margaret sat atop the head of a Romanian longhorn dragon, fishing rod in hand, leisurely night fishing while waiting for Rove. A bamboo fish basket hung from the dragon's golden horns. With a gentle flick of her wrist, the fishing rod automatically curved into a beautiful arc, and ripples spread across the lake as a disgusting-looking, green monster with sharp horns emerged from the water. The fishing rod was made from a vibrant green willow branch. It automatically lifted the rod after a fish was hooked, eliminating the need to drag the fish. However, the one that took the bait was a Grundillo, a dark magic creature with a violent temper that liked to attack swimming humans, dragging them into the water to drown them. Margaret wasn't after it, so she poked the horned dragon with her toe. It immediately opened its massive jaws and swallowed the roaring Grundillo whole. Most Grundillo in the Black Lake were pets kept by mermaids, but this mermaid, walking her dog without a leash, obviously wouldn't come ashore to bother Margaret. It wasn't that the mermaids were docile, but rather that upon surfacing and seeing such a large fire dragon, they feared they too would be turned into little spicy snacks and crunched to pieces, so they decided to let Margaret go. Ralph flew straight over and landed on the fire dragon's head. Margaret reeled in her fishing rod and glanced at the two flying brooms that followed, and the girl on them. Margaret crossed her arms and looked at Fleur for a moment before asking, "The half-vessel you met on the Mayflower last year, right?" "Yes, this is Fleur. She has a younger sister named Gabrielle," Ralph said. "Ponytail, buck-toothed girl, half-vessel." Margaret glanced at the boy, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Ralph, I always feel like there's a girl with you whenever I see you. Who will appear next time I come to Hogwarts? That ghost named Helena, or the mermaid you rescued on the Mayflower? Grandpa told me not to be withdrawn and to make more friends." Ralph chuckled awkwardly. Seeing Fleur get off the broom, he introduced her. "Fleur, this is my sister Margaret." Margaret greeted Fleur. She was quite proper in front of Ralph, not at all neurotic. Fleur seemed a little reserved, even though she was only a year younger than Marguerite, making them practically the same age. "By the way, Marguerite," Ralph said, stepping on the dragon scales, "why did you ride Wagger here?" "I brought it to Hogwarts," Marguerite smiled. "It'll be the first thing you'll be dealing with in your project." Sherry and Hermione had heard Ralph mention the project before and seemed fine, but Fleur was taken aback, looking at Marguerite in astonishment. "The first project is a dragon? Does that mean the warriors will have to fight a dragon?" "No, of course not," Marguerite shook her head. Fleur breathed a sigh of relief. At least it wasn't a dragon. It was too absurd. But Marguerite's next words made her heart leap into her throat again. "The fire dragon is just one of the magical creatures you'll be facing, nothing more." "Let's go," Margaret said. "Let's go see the other magical creatures." To be honest, after learning about the competition, even I want to transfer to Hogwarts and participate in this Triwizard tournament. It's really exciting. The Romanian longhorn dragon spread its enormous black wings, flapping the icy air, and swiftly swept across the Black Lake, flying into the distance. The fire dragon was incredibly fast. In just a few minutes, it appeared above the forbidden forest, and the dense forest quickly disappeared, turning into a rugged gray rock hill. Then, everyone witnessed an extremely terrifying scene. A fire dragon covered in black scales, resembling a lizard, with yellow eyes and bronze horns, breathed its breath towards a distance. The magical creature attacked by this Hungarian tree peak was a cablo dragon lying in a pool of water. It raised its long, slender neck, like a plesiosaur, and let out a deafening, piercing roar, then instantly spewed out a column of ice. Fire and ice clashed. The ice evaporated instantly under the dragon's breath's intense heat, and scorching steam spread rapidly. Several dragon tamers shouted ahead, trying to separate the two fighting magical creatures, but their troubles only intensified. A thunderbird flapped its wings, gathering thunderclouds that grew increasingly dense. Lightning tore through the night sky, and black rain pounded heavily against the red rocks. A large snow leopard, confined within an area enclosed by thick iron plates, stood on its hind legs, roaring and then hurling snowballs several times its own size in all directions. Scales from the neck and tail of a scaly dragon fell to the ground, triggering a chain reaction of explosions. A harpy bird broke free of its cage, and a group of tamers shouted, "Spell the stunning charm." Count to 3, all at once. Seeing each tamer draw their wand, they yelled in unison, "Stun!" Their stunning charms shot into the dark night sky like rockets, sparks raining down on the harpy bird's feathered body. It finally crashed to the ground with a deafening roar that shook the surrounding pebbles. The wizards approached the fallen harpy bird, quickly tightening its chains and securing it firmly to the iron post, then using their wands to drive the post deep into the ground. Other magical creatures continued their barrage, spraying bursts of fire, water, and poisonous mist into the dark night sky. There were at least 100 wizards on the field, 7 or 8 of them assigned to each magical creature. For a moment, not only Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur, but even Ralph was stunned. Red copper dragon, great snow white rabbit beast, great ferocious jackal dragon, cabro dragon, poisonous bird, sand dragon, thunder bird, rock thief dragon, basiljuice, ferocious acid wyvern, giant gas frog, flying black crow. This was just a handful of magical creatures that Ralph had seen, and some he had never even encountered before. "These are the magical creatures you'll face in your first project," Margaret smiled. "Grandpa will temporarily construct a large forest, and these magical creatures will be placed in their suitable habitats. You 15 warriors will be released into it, to hunt, or be hunted." Ralph was speechless. Was this some kind of three-way battle for supremacy, or Monster Hunter? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 587, Harry's First Love. The Triwizard Tournament had turned into a Monster Hunter tournament, which had its pros and cons. The advantage was that it wasn't a one-on-one competition anymore. With more participants, familiar warriors could be paired up illegally, forcing it into a team competition. The disadvantage was the sheer number and power of the magical creatures. It might become monster hunters, rather than monster hunters. Fortunately, there was still plenty of time, and while Ralph wasn't familiar with many of the magical creatures, he could learn about them beforehand. Most importantly, Ralph could ask his grandfather for a corresponding magical creature to practice within his own box. This was the biggest advantage of a magizoologist. As Ralph said, cheating was a traditional virtue of the Triwizard Tournament. After Fleur learned about the first event, Maxim learned it too, and then the other warriors of Boxpartons learned it the following day. The 4 warriors, who had been laughing and joking, immediately stopped laughing, tears welling up inside. Sure enough, there are no free lunches, only traps. What could Maxim say? He could only offer them words of comfort. The other 10 champions who hadn't perished would enjoy the game with him. These words didn't offer much solace. It was like being told that a few more would die with you, but that didn't change the fact that you were going to die anyway. It wasn't just these 4 champions who were laughing and joking every day. Ron was too. Ron was a poor student, not particularly athletic, and practically invisible at Hogwarts. Even though he was constantly by the side of the incredibly popular boy who had survived a near-death experience, his exposure still made him largely ignored. Now, things were different. He was a champion, one of only 5 champions at Hogwarts. Though not as popular as the other 4, he was still a champion. Wherever Ron went, people wanted to know how he became a champion, and occasionally someone would ask for his autograph. This was the first time Ron had ever received such treatment, and he clearly enjoyed it. However, this joyful experience ended on his way to potions class. Because Ron ran into Sirius Black, who brought him some terrible news. "Harry, Ron, the warrior's first challenge will be facing dragons, great jackals, pixie birds, thunderbirds, and other magical creatures." Harry and Ron's faces turned green instantly, staring blankly at Sirius. Harry stammered, Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure." Sirius could see the deep fear in Harry's eyes. He sighed softly, "Remus and I saw it with our own eyes. Those magical creatures are deep in the Forbidden Forest." Harry was so shocked he couldn't speak for a long time. After a long while, he managed to regain his composure and said with difficulty, But, how could we possibly deal with a dragon? It is very troublesome. Dragons are incredibly strong and possess extremely powerful magic. It would take 6 or 7 well-trained adult wizards to defeat one, but it's not entirely impossible," Sirius said. "The dragon's eyes are its weakest point." Using an eye-stealing charm to hit its eyes can save its life, but we don't know the eye-stealing charm, Harry said, his face crestfallen. Remus and I can teach you, Sirius said urgently. There's still plenty of time before the tournament starts, you'll definitely be able to learn. Harry nodded, then asked, so, will this eye-bang charm work against magical creatures like thunderbirds and peekaboo? Sirius was momentarily speechless. Of course, it wouldn't. Remus and I will find other ways to deal with the other magical creatures. Anyway, don't worry. Hurry up and get into the classroom, class is about to start. If you're late, Snape will punish you. After saying this, Sirius hurriedly left. Come on, Ron, Harry said, walking towards the classroom, but suddenly noticed that Ron, who hadn't spoken, was still standing there. He asked in confusion, what's wrong, Ron? Did you hear what Sirius said? We have to deal with dragons and thunderbirds, Ron said in a trembling voice. Of course I heard it, but didn't Sirius also say he could help us find magic to deal with them? He was just trying to comfort us, Ron shouted. What magic can deal with them? Our weapons are wands, thin little sticks, and we're dealing with a 50-foot-tall dragon covered in scales and spikes, breathing fire from its nostrils. Then what do you suggest we do? Harry was also getting annoyed. Should we just quit? Ron said excitedly. Go find Dumbledore and tell him we're not going to be champions. He's always been so kind to you, he'll definitely agree. You forgot, Harry reminded him. On the day of the champion selection, Dumbledore said that once someone is chosen by the Goblet of Fire, a powerful magical contract is formed between them and that contract must be obeyed. Anyone who refuses to participate or gives up halfway will suffer a terrible fate. Ron's mouth dropped open, his expression shifting from excitement to fear, then to frustration and anger. Harry heard Ron cursing, and finally, his voice trailed off as he covered his face and said, It's a dragon, how could we possibly handle it? We'll see. Let's go to class first, or Snape won't let us off the hook, Harry said, flustered. Neither of them spoke again, each lost in their own thoughts as they entered the underground classroom. Once inside, Harry heard hushed conversations and sensed everyone's eyes on him and Ron. Harry initially assumed everyone knew about the first project and was discussing them. But he quickly realized otherwise, as Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle approached, seemingly overjoyed about something. Potter, Weasley. You two are in the papers, Malfoy exclaimed, waving a copy of the Daily Prophet and speaking loudly enough for everyone in the classroom to hear. Listen to this, Malfoy read with great feeling. Harry has finally found his first love at Hogwarts. His close friend Colin Creevey says that Harry's inseparable from a girl named Ron Weasley, who is stunningly beautiful and comes from a pure-blood family. Like Harry, she is one of the school's top students and a champion in the Triwizard Tournament. They are also the only couple of champions. The news came so suddenly that Harry froze for a moment, then his face flushed as if he had been slapped, and he snatched the newspaper. Just as Harry was about to read the newspaper, Snape walked into the classroom. He quickly hid the newspaper, but it was too late. Snape walked over, flashing his signature smile, and said slowly, Potter, give it to me, let me see if there's anything interesting. Chapter 588 This is Rita Skeeter reporting for you. Although Harry hadn't read the newspaper yet, he knew from Malfoy's reading that what was written there must be outrageous. If he gave the newspaper to Snape and had it read aloud in public, Harry felt he might never be able to hold his head up again. He immediately crumpled the newspaper into a ball, about to tear it to shreds, when Snape strode over, stared at Harry, and said coldly, Potter, give me the thing now. You don't want Gryffindor to lose 100 points because of you, do you? Harry gritted his teeth and reluctantly handed over the newspaper. Snape took the Daily Prophet, reopened it, glanced at it a few times, and then clicked his tongue. Then, he cleared his throat and, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, began, My name is Harry Potter. Strangers call me the boy who lived, enemies call me Pot, and friends call me Harry. Today, in this special interview, I'm going to reveal a secret I've kept hidden for many years. I was a premature baby, gifted from a young age. On the day I was born, a phoenix flew to my bedside. When I was 3 or 4 months old, I began a magical rampage, once causing a huge fire in my house. At 6 or 7 months old, I first encountered Quidditch and mastered it without a teacher. Even my father was no match for me. A year after my birth, I defeated Vanderbilt, and to this day, I still have his mark on my forehead. Harry was stunned. He had never said these things before, not even in private, let alone during an interview. Ignoring Harry's reaction, Snape continued reading. For so long I've wondered, having rushed into this world and wasted 14 years, when will I finally reap the rewards of my magical talent that even illusion fears? Today I finally understand, the Triwizard Tournament was prepared for me. A low chuckle filled the classroom. Harry tried to avoid looking at Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, even though the three of them were shaking with laughter and accidentally fell to the ground. Last night, my dear father told me. Snape paused, revealing his teeth, perhaps trying to laugh, but it only made his face look even greasy. Good heavens, Potter, what's wrong with you now? James Potter has been dead for 13 years, why would he tell you? Oh, it was a dream. The laughter in the underground classroom grew even louder. Not only the Slytherin students, but even the Gryffindor students couldn't help but laugh at this hellish joke. Snape's thin lips twitched, revealing a malicious smile. He glanced at Harry and read aloud, my father appeared to me in a dream, telling me I must win the Triwizard Tournament to comfort his and my mother's spirits in heaven. I will definitely win, because my parents gave me strength. I know that if they could see me now, they would be very proud of me. Yes, sometimes at night, I still cry for them, and I don't think it's shameful to admit it. Snape shifted his gaze from the newspaper back to Harry's eyes, his face expressionless. Potter, you're still crying for your parents in the middle of the night? Oh, this is the first time I've heard of such a thing. Give Potter one of your handkerchiefs, Malfoy, so he doesn't break down in tears during potions class. Yes, Professor Snape. Malfoy stood up excitedly, tossing a rag beside the cauldron to Harry. Harry, his face flushed, didn't catch it, letting it fall to the ground. Just a dozen minutes ago, he thought the most terrifying thing in the world was the first event of the Triwizard Tournament, but now he had changed his mind. 10 dragons combined wouldn't be as terrifying as this article, and what's worse, Snape read it aloud in front of everyone. He read it in a mocking tone, pausing after each sentence to make the students laugh to their heart's content. Harry felt his face burning, his heart pounding. He felt like he was sitting on pins and needles, like he had thorns in his back, like he had a fishbone stuck in his throat, and his toes were so embarrassed they were practically digging holes in the ground. This unprecedented sense of shame quickly spread to Ron beside him, because Rita Skeeter had described them as an inseparable, loving couple in the article. Like Harry, Weasley is one of the school's top students, and also a champion in this Triwizard Tournament. They're also the only couple of champions. Snape sneered. Potter, when did you and Weasley become top students? I didn't know about that. I'll ask Professor McGonagall later, she might know. Harry jumped up, trying to snatch back the newspaper to stop Snape from further humiliating him, but Snape took a step back and said, 10 points deducted from Gryffindor. You sit down. Harry had no choice but to sit back down. Snape continued reading. In an interview, Ron Weasley openly admitted a relationship with Potter. Yes, I like Harry, and no one is closer than the two of us. This summer, Harry stayed at my house, and we slept in the same room. My parents, of course, didn't object. They all treated Harry like family. Weasley was half happy and half complaining. Compared to Harry, she felt like an outsider. This is Rita Skeeter reporting for the station. Snape wore an indescribable expression as he stared at Harry and Ron, seemingly surprised that the two were such troublemakers. This outrageous situation made even the usually amused Snape feel like he'd eaten chocolate-flavored shit. Ron, what nonsense are you spouting in front of that woman? Harry snapped. What nonsense? You slept in the same room as me during the summer, Ron retorted. Wasn't I telling the truth? Snape interrupted their argument, coldly stating, while I don't discriminate against homosexuals, that doesn't mean you can flirt in my get-out-of-class. Gryffindor loses another 10 points. We weren't flirting. Harry glared at Snape. Oh, so it's a broken relationship, Snape said sarcastically. I'm sorry, but please keep your romantic entanglements after class. Hermione sat beside a cauldron, watching the scene with lingering fear. She had initially wondered why Ron disliked Rita Skeeter so much and refused her interview. Now she understood completely. Hermione couldn't imagine how distorted and fabricated the story would be if her, Ralph's, or Sherry's names appeared in this article. It was terrifying. Thanks to the 3 generous donors, first encounter with blooming flowers, I want to compete with the heavens, and a tall chicken, for their generous donations. Chapter 589 Shirley, Ralph, I will protect you. Rita Skeeter's article spread like wildfire throughout Hogwarts. Harry and Ron's fame in England surpassed Ralph's, reaching a point where everyone knew them. Wherever they went at Hogwarts, Students pointed and whispered, not about the Triwizard Tournament, but about their Hogwarts love story. It wasn't discrimination, after all, they were gay in England. Harry even found several muscular male students standing behind him in the bathroom, asking if he needed soap. Those expectant looks weren't discrimination, they were practically ready for a deep conversation. Ron wasn't bothered by the boys, but he was harassed by his family. Before, one letter a month was considered frequent, but now it was 7 a day. Mrs. Weasley, afraid of upsetting Ron, didn't say it explicitly in her letters, but she subtly hinted that he and Harry should prioritize their studies and that their relationship was secondary. The Weasleys had 6 sons, so they didn't need Ron to have more children. But the Potters had only one son per generation for 3 generations, and they needed to continue the family name. Mrs. Weasley also regretted inviting Harry to stay at their home several times, intending to let him feel the warmth of home, but who would have thought that Ron would use him as a tool? What a tragedy. Ron had also read the newspaper. He was secretly glad that he had threatened Rita, otherwise he would have been the protagonist. Rita might not be very strong, but she could easily ruin someone's reputation. However, this wasn't Ron's current concern. His main focus was on the Triwizard Tournament. The first event involved more than a dozen magical creatures. The best way to deal with them easily was to find some of the same kind as sparring partners. Ron didn't have any in his suitcase, but Newt did, so he asked Marjorie to get him a Beetlejuice to practice on. The Beetlejuice had arrived, but an unexpected problem arose. Norbert was currently in heat, emanating a strong female dragon scent. The Beetlejuice, upon entering the box, immediately clung to it. What a foolproof plan. Standing on a patch of grass, Ralph and Sherry looked up and saw 2 intersecting red and green streaks across the azure sky. Norbert was a Norwegian ridgeback, its scales a vibrant green with a black ridge along its back. The Beetlejuice's scales were dark red, while its wing bones and spine were milky white. They circled in the sky, rising higher and higher, competing with each other. Reaching the top of the box, the 2 dragons simultaneously folded their wings, intertwining into a ball of scales, swooping down with sharp cries, claws lashing and tails whipping, attacking each other. Upon reaching the lake, they immediately separated, hissing and rising again, flapping their wings to part the steaming water. The girl with the ponytail stood on tiptoe, looking at the 2 fighting dragons, and said worriedly, "Rolf, will Norbert get hurt?" Norbert had been living in the box for a few months after hatching, and was now an adult. Cheryl had practically raised him herself, so naturally she was worried about him and afraid he would get hurt. "Don't worry," Ralph smiled, looking up at the sky, and reassured her, "female Norwegian ridgebacks are much more ferocious than male dragons. Just be thankful that Norbert doesn't hurt that Beetlejuice." Norbert was ferocious, and much larger than the Beetlejuice. A pony trying to pull a large cart was like a toothpick stirring a large vat. Ralph was already worried about the Beetlejuice's safety. Sure enough, the next second, Norbert grabbed the Beetlejuice by the neck and threw it violently. It drew a pathetic arc in the air and crashed into a valley, where a series of explosions echoed from the ground. "Looks like Norbert doesn't like this Beetlejuice, and neither do I," Ralph said, as if he were choosing a son-in-law. "Not only is it small, but it's also ugly. Its scales fall off with the slightest movement." He had actually planned to go to Scandinavia during the summer to find a male Norwegian ridgeback, but various things had come up, and he hadn't had the time. However, this Triwizard Tournament had brought in many dragons, so Ralph was sure to find a satisfactory one to help Norbert through his heat cycle. If all else failed, he'd have to resort to manual labor, like how some people use cotton swabs to help cats in heat, but this was Norbert's first time, and he couldn't use any tools unless absolutely necessary. Shara glanced at the time and reminded him, "Ralph, Hermione and Fleur should be here by now." Ralph hummed in agreement, turned to look at the Rune Horse drinking single malt whiskey in the stable, and said softly, "Let's ride the Rune Horse." The girl with the ponytail nodded and walked towards the stable with the boy, encountering a group of giant dung beetles carrying Rune Horse manure along the way. Whether it was the strong aroma of wine or the alcohol in their food, they were all dizzy and unsteady, staggering as they pushed through the horse manure. The 2 quickly arrived at the enormous stable and chose the largest of the divine Rune horses as their mounts. However, it was larger than an Asian elephant, and without assistance, it was impossible to mount. Just as Shirley was about to use magic to float onto the horse's back, a pair of warm hands wrapped around her waist from behind. The girl with the ponytail didn't struggle or resist, allowing Rolf to hold her in his arms. The two floated up and landed together on the horse's back. Rolf held Shirley's delicate waist, while the girl grasped the reins. With a gentle shake, the divine roan horse immediately responded, its gait steady as it moved forward. The silver bells on the horse's neck tinkled softly. Rolf rested his chin on the girl's shoulder and whispered in her ear, "Shirley, at the beginning of the first project, all the warriors will definitely be scattered and won't gather together. I made a magical item out of Gallon, which acts as a locator. You can carry it with you during the competition, and we can sense your location and find you as quickly as possible." The girl with the ponytail obediently hummed in agreement, then softly said, "Rolf, you don't need to worry about my safety. I've been your assistant for 3 years and learned many skills to deal with those magical creatures." "I know." Rolf stroked Shirley's ponytail and smiled. "I just want to find me as soon as possible so you can protect me." Shirley smiled sweetly, turned around, wrapped her arms tightly around Rolf's neck, gently kissed his lips, and then closed her eyes and murmured, "Rolf, I will protect you well, thanks to a tall-legged chicken, the moon is beautiful tonight, and a yordle living a good life for their generous donations." Chapter 590 Teacher Scamander. Inside the cabin, Hermione sat in a chair, holding a notebook and reading with a furrowed brow. The notebook contained information from Ravenclaw. Although she had left a note saying the book couldn't be taken out of the Chamber of Secrets, it didn't prevent her from using a copying charm to create a duplicate, which wouldn't affect the content. However, the notebook was written entirely in runes, and although Hermione had studied for a year, she was still only at the stage of recognizing characters. She needed to consult a rune dictionary frequently to annotate everything, making reading quite difficult. Some words couldn't be found in the dictionary, so Hermione had to mark them and then ask Rolf for help. Fleur stood by a bookshelf not far away, browsing the books. Almost all of them were related to magical creatures, and Fleur initially thought they were left by Rolf, but after flipping through a few, she realized that the handwriting was very neat and not Rolf's. It could only be Sherry's handwriting. She's actually read so many books about magical creatures, Fleur was secretly alarmed. What was even more terrifying was that she had taken detailed notes on each one, instead of just skimming through them. Just then, a loud bang came from outside the door. The impact was so violent that it shook the cabin, and dust fell from the rafters. Hermione and Fleur thought it was an earthquake and rushed out of the room, only to find that the source of the tremor was a dragon. Norbert landed on the open ground in front of the cabin, folded its wings that blotted out the sky, and lay down on the ground. Hermione stared at the dragon, which was as big as a mountain, and asked loudly, "Norbert, do you know where Ralph and Sherry are?" The group had agreed to meet here to teach each other how to deal with the magical creatures that appeared in the first project, but Ralph and Sherry were already late. Could something have happened to them? Although Norbert had seen Hermione before, they weren't very familiar with each other, so he ignored her and lay lazily on the ground, basking in the sun on his scaly belly. "If this fire dragon doesn't hurt anyone, I'd like to try it on it and see if it works. If successful, it would be a trump card in the first round." Hermione thought for a moment and asked, "Nober, is that alright?" Seeing that it didn't speak, she turned to Fleur and said, "Nober agrees." Fleur thought this was too hasty, but she trusted Ralph's training abilities, so she cautiously walked towards the fire dragon. Nober stared at Fleur with its narrow eyes, confirming that she was Ralph and Sherry's friend, a food that couldn't be eaten, and then ignored her. Fleur stared intently into Nober's eyes, and Nober suddenly felt drowsiness wash over it. Its head swayed, and soon it dozed off. Nober drifted into sleep, snoring through its nose like a pair of mating wild ducks, while simultaneously breathing out a burst of flame. A furnace-like hot wind swept over, and Fleur, caught off guard, immediately had her skirt catch fire. Just then, rain began to fall, extinguishing the fire on Fleur's body. She wasn't injured, but she was still quite disheveled. Her exquisite dress, in particular, was riddled with holes, revealing large patches of her pale skin. Hermione quickly came over, conjured a blanket, and covered Fleur, whose clothes barely covered her body. Fleur looked up and saw a rune horse descending, with Ralph and Sherry jumping off its back. Ralph, who had just summoned the rain, looked at Fleur and said softly, "It seems there's something wrong with your magic. You need to stay away from the fire dragon." Fleur wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, blushing, and whispered, "It seems so." Luckily, she had tested it here beforehand, otherwise, Getting burned by the flames during the competition would have been incredibly embarrassing, and of course, it was already quite awkward now. "Shirley, did you take Fleur to change her clothes?" Ralph said. "Fleur should be able to wear the robe Margaret left behind." The girl with the ponytail nodded and left with Fleur. Hermione asked suspiciously, "Why are you and Shirley late?" "The talisman horse drank too much and was just acting crazy." Ralph laughed. "All right, go get some chairs. I'll wake Norbert up. Class starts soon." Hermione looked at Ralph suspiciously, seemingly not quite believing his explanation, but she still turned and ran towards the cabin. A moment later, Shirley, Hermione, and Fleur, now dressed again, sat on the chairs, while Ralph stood in front of the three girls. He waved his wand, and a dozen photographs floated in midair. "These are the magical creatures we will be facing," Ralph said. "There's still some time before the competition starts, so I'll give you a short sprint training session to teach you how to easily deal with them. The first lesson will focus on how to deal with dragons." Ralph pointed to the teaching equipment, Norbert, and asked, "So, who can tell me what the dragon's weakness is?" Hermione, as always, raised her hand high. Ralph was pleased with her enthusiasm and called out, "Miss Granger, Teacher Scamander." Hermione added teacher cooperatively, smiling, "It's the eyes." "That's right, the dragon's weakness is obvious, it's in its eyes." Ralph nodded. "A simple eye strike charm will work, but it's easy to provoke the dragon. Don't forget, dragons can breathe fire over large areas. Using an eye strike charm to hide a dragon's eyes might end up like Fleur just now." Fleur, as a negative example, rubbed her burning cheeks. "The dragon's real weakness is its nose, or rather, its nostrils," Ralph said. "The best way is to plug its nose. This magic was taught to me by Lupin back in Romania, and now I'm teaching it to you," Ralph said, pulling two small, silver, spherical objects from his pocket. "These are tear gas canisters. Watch closely." Ralph raised his wand to shoulder height, aimed at Norbert, and said, "Vadise." The two tear gas canisters flew like bullets towards Norbert, so fast that it didn't have time to react before they entered its nostrils. The canisters suddenly exploded. Norbert tried to breathe fire, but it suddenly started sneezing wildly, one after another, unable to exhale any dragon breath. Sherry, who had already mastered this technique, remained calm, while Hermione and Fleur's eyes lit up, clearly amazed by the ingenuity of the method. "However, considering we might only be allowed to bring wands in this time, and not tear gas or other auxiliary tools, we need to find other weaknesses of the dragon. Anyone know?" Sherry raised her hand and said, "Dragons have short attention spans." "That's right," Ralph laughed, "dragons have short attention spans. When they see a larger animal, they are completely distracted and ignore the smaller wizards around them. So, this next spell will project a phantom of a magical creature in front of the dragon's eyes, attracting its attention." Ralph raised his wand, aimed it at Norbert, and then a three-headed dog appeared in its vision. Norbert roared at the three-headed dog, but Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur saw nothing. Ralph clapped his hands and laughed. "All right, girls, grab your wands and let's practice together. Thanks to Silly Young Man for the donation." Chapter 591 The beginning of the True Wizard Tournament. Being a know-it-all isn't a good habit, but teaching others can be incredibly rewarding. Of course, the prerequisite is avoiding dealing with idiots. Otherwise, not only will there be no sense of accomplishment, but you'll likely be driven crazy by your students. Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur were certainly not idiots. They were among the most outstanding students of their age. As their temporary teacher, Ralph found teaching them both enjoyable and fulfilling, and he himself grew considerably through these interactions and exchanges. Thus, before the True Wizard Tournament began, Ralph's secret lessons with the three girls became a regular occurrence. The magical creatures they practiced with changed from Norwegian ridgebacks and basiljuses to puka-e-pukeri, thunderbirds, and even acid wings. This targeted training was truly luxurious. Even the headmasters of other magic schools couldn't replicate it in a short time, let alone Karkaroff and Maxim. The professors, as if they all knew about the tournament events, cancelled the warriors' homework, giving them ample free time to train. Only Snape was an exception. He continued to relentlessly challenge the warriors, a behavior that naturally aroused the dissatisfaction of the other three houses' students. Everyone was saying Snape was a spy for another school, especially after he was seen walking with Durmstrang's headmaster, Karkaroff, on several occasions. These rumors grew increasingly rampant. Many students even wrote to the Ministry of Magic to report Snape, claiming a reward of 5,000 galleons for catching such a spy. As time passed, the day of the match finally arrived. School was closed, and all the students excitedly gathered in the Great Hall early in the morning. While Ralph ate breakfast, students kept coming up to cheer him on, including those from Slytherin. The young Hufflepuff wizards even made a banner that read, "Good luck, Ralph," and waved it incessantly in the Great Hall. After breakfast, Professor McGonagall called Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione to her side. She looked around and frowned, asking, "Where are Potter and Mr. Weasley?" Malfoy, also searching for Harry, scoffed loudly. "They must have run away out of fear." Professor McGonagall ignored Malfoy and looked at Seamus in the crowd, asking, "Mr. Finnegan, did you see them when you woke up this morning?" "No, Professor." Seamus shook his head. "Harry and Ron didn't return to their dormitory last night." McGonagall panicked. Staying out all night was a minor matter. If the two had really run away as Malfoy claimed, that would be a real disaster. Just then, someone excitedly shouted, "They're here, they're here." The crowd quickly dispersed, and Harry and Ron walked over, looking exhausted, followed by Sirius Black and Lupin. "Sorry, Professor McGonagall," Sirius said softly. "Remus and I trained them last night." Professor McGonagall was speechless. Training all night before the competition was like cramming for a final exam. She didn't know whether to call it last-minute cramming or last-minute preparation. She could only hope for the latter. "Potter, you two go get some breakfast. You can eat on the way," Professor McGonagall urged. "Hurry up." Harry and Ron hurried towards the Gryffindor dining table, and Professor McGonagall took the opportunity to inquire about the training. "Not bad," Sirius smiled. "Harry finally learned the summoning charm in the early morning. And with the eye disease charm he already knew, there shouldn't be any major problems." "What about you, Remus?" To improve concentration, Sirius and Lupin taught Harry and Ron separately. Lupin's expression wasn't too good. He had been teaching Ron all night, and he still hadn't mastered the summoning charm, and the other spells were also, well, let's just say they weren't very good. He had never seen such a slow learner. After Harry and Ron got their breakfast, the group followed Professor McGonagall out of the Great Hall and headed towards the Forbidden Forest. They soon reached the edge of the forest, where a large golden tent had been erected. Professor McGonagall stopped at the entrance, looking at Ron and the others, and said, "Don't be nervous, keep your heads down. We've placed some wizards inside. If things get bad, they'll step in and take control. The most important thing is to use your abilities fully. You are no less capable than anyone else." "Thank you, Professor McGonagall," Ron smiled. "See you after the competition." The boy went into the tent first, followed closely by Sherry after saying goodbye to Hermione and Professor McGonagall. 10 warriors from Durmstrang and Boxburtons had already gathered inside, but no one was smiling. Everyone looked tense. Krum paced back and forth with a grim expression, clearly already aware of what was to come. Fleur sat equally uneasily on a low wooden stool in the corner. Despite having learned many techniques from Ron, she was still somewhat nervous. Upon seeing Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione, she immediately approached them. "Ralph, you're here. That's wonderful." Ludo also turned to look at them, cheerfully saying, "The 5 champions of Hogwarts are here, so everyone's here." Everyone didn't include Lucius Malfoy and his Death Eaters. Although they were adults, their magical skills had become rusty after years away from school. For their safety, they would enjoy a low-difficulty competition. "Let me introduce you to the first event," Ludo said excitedly, pointing to a magical map on the table. The map was 3-dimensional, clearly showing hills, lakes, swamps, and caves, as well as projections of many magical creatures. Ralph stared intently at the map, quickly memorizing the terrain. "Our competition will take place in the Forbidden Forest, where a large area is magically sealed off," Ludo explained, pointing to the map. "You will all enter it, and only by completing the competition can you leave." "How do we complete the competition?" a Durmstrang male student asked in heavily accented English. "Ghost grass, dragon crystal, and golden egg," Ludo said. "You need to find these 3 items to complete the competition. As for where they are, you'll have to find them yourselves. Your only weapons are your own wands. The competition ends at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. You also have 1 distress flare, which you can use in case of danger, but remember, using it means forfeiting the competition." "Can we bring food?" a girl from Boxburtons asked. "Of course not," Ludo shook his head. "Miss, the forest is full of food. You can find plenty of fruit just by scavenging." but identifying which is poisonous and which isn't, what's edible and what's inedible, this kind of herbal knowledge is also part of the competition. Ralph raised his hand, and Ludo smiled. Ralph, what's your question? Can I bring a barbecue grill? Ludo coughed several times before recovering. Why didn't you ask if you could bring cumin? Are you going to a competition or a picnic? In short, Ludo said solemnly, holding up the purple silk bag, I will hand this bag to each of you. You will draw a small ball from it. Each ball has a code on it. That represents your location in the forest. Good luck. Chapter 592 Blue Bear Beast. After months of quiet, the Hogwarts Quidditch arena was bustling with activity again. Students from all over the school had come, crowding into chairs, each one beaming with excitement. Except for Slytherin, the other young wizards waved badger, lion, and eagle banners, cheering loudly for their heroes. Buttons had fewer students, but their banner, embroidered with 2 crossed gold ones and 3 stars above, stood out in the crowd. Durmstrang was equally impressive. Their silk banner, featuring a double-headed eagle and a deer's head, fluttered in the wind, bearing Cyrillic script. The spectators cheered for a long time, but no heroes appeared. Instead, 15 enormous magical screens floated in the air above the arena. These screens, like the Quidditch World Cup, were displaying advertisements, but they were all for small shops like Honeyduke's and Zonko's Joke Shop. There was no way around it. The Triwizard Tournament only had about 1,000 students and teachers from Hogwarts, Durmstrang, and Buttons, far too few. And the vast majority of these meager spectators were poor students with limited funds and many obligations. Their purchasing power was extremely limited. Even if Firebolts were to run an advertisement, it wouldn't cover the advertising costs. Therefore, they were already secretly grateful for the sponsorship from Hogsmeade and some small shops in Nocturne Alley. Hello everyone, I'm Ludo Bagman, the host of this Triwizard Tournament. Ludo was still wearing his Hornets jersey. He stood in the center of the arena, his voice booming like thunder, resounding throughout the entire Quidditch pitch. As a retired player, Ludo was considered an excellent commentator. How excellent! In all his years of commentary, he had only had one broadcast mishap. Well, that was during the Quidditch World Cup final. Therefore, many students couldn't help but boo when they heard this Jinx's voice again. Fortunately, Ludo was used to the world and didn't care about the boos. Instead, he raised his arm with enjoyment and shouted, Welcome! Welcome to the 126th Triwizard Tournament. That's right, in the past 700 years, 125 tournaments have been held. Hogwarts has won 63 times, Buttons is second with 62. As for Durmstrang, unfortunately, it's still 0. I wonder if our generation will be fortunate enough to witness this breakthrough after 700 years. That would be a giant leap for Durmstrang. The students burst into laughter, but Headmaster Karkaroff, sitting on the platform, looked very displeased. The commentator was really exposing their weakness like that. Didn't he know not to hit someone in the face? So rude. Durmstrang might have been weaker a few years ago, a few hundred years ago, but with Krum this year, things will definitely be different. Krum will definitely achieve the transformation from 0 to 1. Karkaroff firmly believed this. Alright, enough chit-chat. The first event of this Triwizard Tournament will take place in the dangerous Forbidden Forest and will last 2 days and 1 night. Only warriors who complete the task or forfeit can leave the competition area early. As Ludo spoke, the advertisements on the magic screen disappeared, revealing 15 warriors. Each occupied a magic screen. It seems the warriors are in position and have entered the Forbidden Forest. They are scattered, maintaining a certain distance from each other. Let's see what the warriors do next. Oh, Scamander. What's he doing? Ludo's words drew all the students' attention to the magic screen in the center. Ralph's life-size image was initially visible, but his face grew larger and larger, quickly filling the entire screen, and then the entire screen turned black. A commotion erupted in the Quidditch arena. Inside the Forbidden Forest, Ralph hovered in midair, reaching out to grasp a winged magical object, gently playing with it. It was only the size of a walnut, golden in color, with a pair of small silver wings and a glass eye on it. This magical item looked a lot like the golden snitch, but Ralph knew it was a camera-like monitoring device that could transmit the activities of each warrior to the audience in real time. Of course, when privacy was needed, a warrior could simply use a simple spell to turn it off, and the image would temporarily disappear. If this thing were shrunk down a bit, it could be used as a pinhole camera, and unlike electrical appliances, It wouldn't be affected by magical magnetic interference, comparable to a miniature Rita. Ralph played with it for a while, planning to take one back to study after the competition. Of course, it was purely academic research. He wasn't trying to spy on anyone. After all, he wasn't a pervert like Rita. Ralph put down the monitor and landed back on the ground. He raised his wand, pointed the tip at his temple, and pulled out a small strand of silvery white substance. He quickly waved his wand, and the silvery white substance, like a spinning sand table, gradually formed a three-dimensional map in midair. This map was exactly the same as the one Ralph had seen in the tent, clearly marking the mountains and rivers involved in the first project, as well as the locations of the dozen or so magical creatures. Ralph gazed at the map, lost in thought. The warriors needed to find ghost grass, dragon crystal, and the golden egg. Ludo hadn't specified where to look, but Ralph knew. Ghost grass lived in swamps. Dragon crystal was a gem formed from lava flowing from a volcano, solidified upon sudden cooling. It was near a volcano. Ralph looked at the map. It only showed one volcano and one swamp, so the target was obvious. As for the golden egg, it was, of course, in the nest of those dozen or so dangerous magical creatures. Oh, Mr. Scamander pulled out his memories, the map made by the Ministry of Magic, and he actually presented it from memory, Ludo exclaimed in shock. Ralph's finger is pointing to the location on the map, precisely where the ghost grass and dragon crystal are. Merlin, look at this incredible guy. He cracked the Ministry of Magic's meticulously designed challenge in just 1 minute. And the other warriors are still like headless flies. Ludo was indeed astonished. This competition had lasted 2 days and 1 night, not only because the magical creatures were too dangerous, but also because the map area was too vast. The warriors would need a long time to explore and find the volcano and swamp. But Ralph found his target in a minute, making the Ministry of Magic and the other warriors seem foolish. Hearing Ludo's explanation, all the students in the audience applauded, cheered, shouted, whistled, and whispered excitedly. "What's that?" "There's something in the bushes behind Scamander," Ludo shouted. "Is he going to be the first to be attacked by a magical creature?" All the students stared intently at the screen, and saw a magical creature over 3 meters tall suddenly emerge from the bushes. It resembled a bear, with bluish-green fur, and its forelimbs and nape covered in hard carapaces. Ralph heard a thunderous roar behind him, turned sharply, looked at the magical creature, and whispered, "A blue bear beast." Chapter 593 The Super Saiyan of the Magic World? The blue bear beast, a magical creature resembling a brown bear, has bluish-green fur and hard carapaces covering its forelimbs and nape. Known for its love of honey, it's also called the honey hunter. This is a ferocious magical creature. If encountered in the wild, one is usually torn to shreds. So, upon seeing Ralph, the blue bear beast bared its enormous yellow teeth, then charged at him at full speed on all fours. A sudden ding sounded in the boy's mind. Wild blue bear beast detected, triggering side quest 1. Help the hungry blue bear beast obtain blue honey to satisfy its hunger. Reward, blue bear beast armor, summons a physical blue bear beast shell, acting as a protective barrier between yourself and enemies. Its powerful defensive capabilities can withstand most powerful spells. Side quest 2, capture the blue bear beast. Reward, wild wrath, when enraged, the blue bear beast's fur turns from blue to red. Due to its terrifying ferocity and cruelty, it is known as the red-headed blue bear beast. When the host uses this spell, their fur, size, speed, strength, reaction time, and magic power will all be greatly enhanced. Ralph narrowed his eyes. Is this a Super Saiyan, a red-haired version? But he didn't have time to think about it. The blue bear beast had already pounced in front of him in an instant. Its giant bear paw, as big as a fan, swiftly struck the boy's head. Ralph could feel the fierce wind rushing towards him. If you were hit by that claw, his head would either explode like a watermelon or spin 720 degrees. But he didn't move, only silently chanting, "Rock solid." The next moment, Ralph's entire body hardened like stone. This was the petrifying lizard's ability, allowing any part of his body to become as solid as a rock. Ralph, now a stone statue, was struck by the giant claw of the blue bear beast. Under the impact of the immense force, he was sent flying through the air. In the Quidditch arena, thousands of throats gasped simultaneously. Some screamed in fear, while others covered their eyes in despair, as if Ralph was about to be torn to pieces in the next second. But everyone's fear and worry instantly turned into shock and exclamations. Ralph, who had been sent flying, was not injured. He steadied himself, floated in midair, and then, before everyone's eyes, he actually split in two. Two Ralphs stood side by side, their figures suspended in midair, their clear eyes looking down at the roaring blue bear beast. This astonishing scene shocked not only the audience but also the principal and referees on the platform. Many knew that Ralph possessed a magic that allowed him to fly, but this was the first time they had seen him use such magic to create clones. In fact, they had never seen it used by any other wizard. Mrs. Maxim stared at the two Ralphs, her mind racing. She inexplicably thought of the French civets, which would infinitely split when attacked. The host, Ludo, was also momentarily stunned by the two Ralphs, but his professionalism kicked in, and he quickly explained, under the fierce impact of the blue bear beast, Scamander was sent flying into the air. He seemed unharmed, but two Ralphs appeared in the air, and the other one was a phantom. Everyone quickly realized whether it was a phantom or not. Ralph calmly waved his wand, and vines and roots sprouted from the ground, slithering around like long snakes that coiled around the blue bear beast. The blue bear beast grabbed a writhing vine and yanked it off at the roots, but more vines, like a persistent leech, bound its body. At the same time, another Luofu, walking on air, strolled leisurely to the blue bear beast's side, their eyes meeting. The blue bear beast, already heavily bound by vines like a reddish-brown silkworm, was already furious. Seeing Luofu standing before it, its rage surged. The blue bear beast let out a deep, hoarse, and violent roar, like that of a savage beast. It shook its body frantically, then with a sudden burst of strength, the vines on its body snapped inch by inch. Its once green hide instantly turned crimson. The red-hooded blue bear beast was now several times larger than before. It roared, its mouth filled with a foul stench, spraying the boy's face and blowing his golden hair wild. Ralph remained unmoved, meeting its gaze. His lips moved slightly, and he whispered, "Charm spell." The roar of the red-helmeted blue bear beast echoed through the magical curtain, sending chills down everyone's spines. Ludo yelled, "Damn it! Scamander's provocation has driven the blue bear beast mad, transforming it into the red-helmeted blue bear beast. It'll take 5 or 6 adult wizards to subdue it." Ralph was far too reckless. He shouldn't have angered this magical creature, he should have run away. What? Ludo gasped in disbelief, his eyes widening in astonishment. Through the magical curtain, the students saw the red-helmeted blue bear open its blood-red maw, lunging at Ralph, but the next second, they witnessed a scene they would never forget. The enraged red-helmeted blue bear stopped its attack, staring blankly at Ralph. After a moment, it lowered its enormous, basket-like head and shyly rubbed against the boy's leg. This stark contrast left everyone feeling utterly bewildered. On the platform, Dumbledore remained calm, while Maxim and Karkaroff exchanged bewildered glances. Karkaroff, in particular, had seen many brilliant students, but Scamander was a first. Was this the Scamander family's magizoologist? This ability to tame magical creatures instantly was truly miraculous. Ralph reached out and gently stroked the head of the red-headed blue bear beast, then tapped its carapace with his fingers, the sound ringing out clearly. He had just used the Vela's charm, which emanated a special aura that could drive magical creatures to madness and obsession. This magic was especially effective on creatures of the opposite sex, like Vela, which easily attracted men, but was less effective on women. This blue bear beast was female, so it was instantly charmed by Ralph. "You'll be my mount for 2 days, and then I'll let you go," Ralph said, landing back on the ground and merging back into his clone. The blue bear crouched on the ground, its left shoulder tilting downwards, and the boy laughed as he leaped up and stood on its shoulder. At this moment, in the deathly silent Quidditch arena, the students all stared intently at the blue bear. It was like a swift horse, carrying Ralph, galloping westward, thanks to the 3 generous donors Bayui, "You Don't Even Call Me Dad," and Grasshopper in the Field for their generous donations. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 594 Warriors in the Competition. After a brief silence, a thunderous applause erupted in the Quidditch arena, the students cheering and applauding Ralph's brilliant performance. Once the applause subsided slightly, Ludo excitedly exclaimed again, "Scamander turning the blue bear into his mount is undoubtedly insane. We don't know how Ralph did it, But for him now, it'll probably be a tedious journey. Let's turn our attention to the other warriors. Crumb of Durmstrang, he's on a snowfield, near the great Snarlord White Rabbit's burrow, where the golden egg he needs is. I wonder if he'll notice it. Fleur de la Cour of Bokespittens, she's come to a mine, the lair of the copper dragon. Will she go in? Ishtar of Bokespittens is resting on a mound. Get away from there quickly. That's the nest of the red-kissed fire ants. Ishtar has indeed been bitten. His arm is visibly swollen. That silly boy, Hermione Granger of Hogwarts, she's entered the territory of the Great Jaggy, a dragon that looks very much like an iguana. It can swallow food several times its own weight in one gulp. Be careful, Harry Potter of Hogwarts. Let me see what he's doing. Oh ho ho, he's using the summoning charm. Standing under a large tree, Harry kept calling out, "Firebolt, come here." Last night, with Sirius's help, Harry had finally mastered this charm. He didn't know if he could succeed, but he had to. After all, it was his only hope of getting through the first task. Harry waited, every cell in his body praying and hoping. Then, he heard something whooshing through the air. Harry turned around and saw his firebolt flying rapidly through the dense forest toward him, stopping abruptly in mid-air beside him, waiting for him to step on it. Loud applause erupted again from the stands. Sirius Black stood up, shouting excitedly, "Harry did it! Harry did it! Oh, that's amazing! Potter actually summoned Firebolt." "Of course, it's not against the rules," Ludo exclaimed. "But I'm curious, Potter's location is over 100 miles from Hogwarts. How did he do it?" To ensure the students' safety and prevent a repeat of the Quidditch World Cup incident, the match was held deep in the Forbidden Forest. The greater the distance, the harder it is to summon with a summoning charm. Over 100 miles away, Harry obviously couldn't summon Firebolt. Sirius had deliberately placed his broom in the forest not far from the match area beforehand, greatly reducing the difficulty. But as Ludo said, as long as the broom wasn't brought into the match area, it wasn't against the rules. Harry Potter mounted Firebolt, pushed off the ground, and flew into the air. "I think this will greatly change the course of the match, giving Potter the lead over the other champions." Ludo's excited voice abruptly stopped. Not only him, but even the cheering students in the arena were stunned. Harry, riding his Firebolt, launched himself forward, then crashed headfirst into a giant web. Among the trees, numerous silver spiderwebs stretched from one to another, densely woven and thick, but because they were transparent, they were difficult to spot on the dark forest. Thus, Harry, who had only been cool for 5 seconds, was now firmly stuck in the web like a moth. Hanging upside down on the web, Harry struggled desperately, but the web was too sticky, and he couldn't break free. Suddenly, he froze, because on a distant tree trunk appeared a spider about half the size of a human. It had 8 strangely long, hairy legs, each with a pair of large, gleaming black pincers, and 8 eyes, staring intently at Harry. It swished its large pincers excitedly, saying, "Fresh human flesh, it's been so long since I've had such a delicious meal. Human flesh delivered right to my door." Harry's previously excited face was instantly filled with terror. On the Quidditch pitch, Hagrid jumped up from his chair in a panic. He hadn't expected Aragog's descendant to be in the first challenge. The 8-eyed spider, Merlin. "There's one in the Forbidden Forest," Ludo shouted. "Potter is in danger. He has to break free of the web immediately." "Wait, Ron Weasley of Hogwarts is in danger too. He's near a terrible trap." The students glanced in disbelief at the magical screen on the far left, where Ron walked alone across a desolate, sun-baked, reddish-brown wasteland. Ron had eaten dry bread that morning and hadn't drunk any water. Now that the sun was up, he was thirsty. But this was an endless wilderness of rocks, sand, and red earth, devoid of any vegetation. Ron stared despairingly at the distant horizon. He had been walking for over 10 minutes, but the red wasteland still stretched endlessly. Just then, Ron saw a large depression ahead. He ran to the edge and looked down, discovering a lush green tree growing at the bottom, bearing fruit. Ron swallowed hard, licked his dry lips, and excitedly ran down, but as he got closer to the bottom, he realized something was wrong. It wasn't a tree at all, but the tail of a magical creature, a tree in disguise. "Damn it, Weasley's fallen into a giant antlion's trap," Ludo roared. Antlions, also called sand monkeys, like to spiral downwards into the sand in one direction, gradually throwing sand out to create a funnel-shaped pit. Once prey enters the pit, it slides to the bottom and is eaten by the antlion. Ron already knew it was a trap, and he frantically scrambled upwards, using both hands and feet. But the slope of the pit was very steep, and the antlion kept throwing sand out from the bottom. After running for several minutes, Ron not only didn't leave the pit, but he was actually sliding downwards little by little. He was terrified. Further into the forest, Sherry arrived at the entrance to a canyon. Looking into the distance, she could see the valley shrouded in warm mist and floating light sources, spores everywhere. Knowing the air was poisonous, Sherry held her breath, waved her wand, and used the bubble head charm to create a large bubble on her head. The girl with the ponytail walked to a rock wall, touched the marks on it, and judging from the shape, they were claw marks left by a poisonous bird. Sherry gripped her wand tightly, and without much hesitation, quickly walked into the valley, thanks to the crescent moon and the river flows east for their generous donations. Chapter 595 The Warrior's Repayment. Deep in the forbidden forest, a blue bear beast galloped westward. Despite the dense forest and rugged terrain, its speed remained undiminished, like a galloping horse. But just as it was about to break through the forest, the blue bear beast leaped high, its claws gripping an oak tree. It didn't let go. In an instant, its body spun like an ape, and then it sat down on a side branch. The boy riding on the beast was nearly thrown off, but luckily he had the foresight to tie a vine around his waist like a seatbelt, preventing him from falling off. Luo Fu glared at the now stopped blue bear beast, displeased. "Are you hungry again?" He had just taken this guy to collect several beehives to replenish its energy, and it hadn't been long. 2 hours of charging, 5 minutes of talk time, and a beehive destroyed every kilometer. The blue bear beast gazed fearfully into the distance, and Rolf immediately understood. It's afraid of that rock thief dragon. According to the map, a rock thief dragon inhabited a nearby canyon. The golden egg it guarded was the closest to Rolf, and he needed to obtain it before searching for Sherry. But this blue bear beast was extremely afraid of the rock thief dragon's aura and refused to enter its territory. This was normal. Seeking advantage and avoiding harm is an animal's instinct. Rolf stared at the canyon, but then sensed movement behind him. He turned sharply and saw the distant forest trembling, with the sounds of trees breaking and wild beasts roaring. The boy narrowed his eyes and quickly located the source of the sounds, a magical creature. It was entirely black, with a bristle as stiff as steel needles on its neck, and 2 tusks protruding from its lips, curving on either side of its sharp snout. A ferocious and ugly creature, a tipo warthog. At this moment, it was chasing a witch. Inside the Quidditch pitch, Ludo noticed the same scene and shouted, "Alyssa boy, the Durmstrang warrior, is being chased by a tipo boar. Oh no, she's in danger." Alyssa herself thought so too. She frantically fled into the depths of the forest, trying to use the trees to block the tipo boar's massive body. She was whipped across the cheek by thorns, leaving thin, scarlet streaks of blood, but she was oblivious, stumbling forward. The trees did not stop the tipo boar's pursuit. It was like a giant armored vehicle, using brute force to snap off entire groves of ancient trees. Hearing the increasingly approaching, thunderous howl, Alyssa could barely breathe. She ran with all her might, but her legs wouldn't obey her, and her speed dwindled. Instinctively, Alyssa scrambled up a large tree, frantically clawing upwards like a monkey, her hands forming a loop. The tipo warthog quickly squeezed to the foot of the tree, its 2 tusks piercing the cedar like swords, causing the tree to shake violently. Alyssa clung tightly to a branch, raised her wand, and began chanting the dark magic taught at school. The tipo warthog's hide was very tough, often used by wizards to make shields and protective clothing, but even it was slashed with gruesome gashes by the deadly spell. But this bloody pain did not frighten the tipo warthog. Instead, it enraged it. Its eyes turned bloodshot, its mane bristled like steel needles, and it roared deafeningly before slamming its head against the tree again. The cedar finally gave way, and with a sharp crack, the trunk snapped, and Alyssa plummeted to the ground. Inside the Quidditch arena, the students, witnessing the scene, couldn't help but sigh in sorrow. Were they about to witness the first death of their warrior? Just as life hung in the balance, a blond boy, like a golden rainbow, streaked across the distance. His speed was lightning fast. In the next second, he was beside Alyssa. The boy reached out and embraced the girl, his toes barely touching the ground, like a dragonfly skimming the water, carrying her 5 or 6 meters away before landing lightly on the ground. "Thank God, Scamander is nearby." Ludo's voice rose again, excitedly shouting, "He saved Miss Alyssa boy." The students stared in disbelief, many initially thinking they were seeing things, blinking hard to confirm it was indeed Rolf. He had actually appeared and saved Alyssa from certain death. A deafening cheer erupted from the crowd. Someone had shouted the name first, and soon, along with Ludo, the entire stadium chanted repeatedly, "Ralph Scamander." Seeing its prey rescued, the ferocious Tipo warthog, its eyes bloodshot, charged at Ralph, intending to kill them both with its horns. The Tipo warthog roared forward, almost within reach. Ralph could even clearly see its terrifying eyes. But he waved his wand and silently chanted, "Azure Bear Armor." The next second, a greenish-blue magical barrier resembling an azure bear appeared before Ralph. The Tipo warthog slammed into it as if hitting an impenetrable wall. Its horns snapped instantly, blood splattering everywhere. Then, the azure bear leaped high into the air, tracing a huge arc, and landed beside the Tipo warthog. It roared, grabbed the Tipo warthog's legs with its claws, spun around, and slammed it away. The giant Tipo warthog crashed to the ground, rolling repeatedly, kicking up clouds of dust. The Tipo warthog, its tusks broken, jumped up in a throbbing pain. It looked at the blue bear-like beast, then quickly turned and whimpered, burrowing into the grass. Ralph put the girl down and asked, "Are you alright?" Alyssa, still shaken by the ordeal, shook her head. She first cautiously looked at the blue bear-like beast, her shock and fear mingling with gratitude as she looked at Ralph. "Thank you for saving me." It was nothing. Following his principle of not wasting anything, Ralph picked up the two broken horns of the Tipo warthog and put them in his pocket. Seeing that Alyssa was alright, he said softly, "Since you're alright, I'll be going now." Seeing Ralph about to leave, Alyssa became anxious and, as if possessed, tugged at his sleeve. The boy stopped, turned around, and smiled, saying, "What, is there something else?" When Ralph smiled, his handsome face radiated a warm, comforting smile, incredibly gentle and captivating. Under his gaze, Alyssa's heart pounded. She felt that this boy was 100 times more gentle and handsome than the most handsome boy in Durmstrang. Her face flushed, and she stammered, "No. You saved me. I want to repay your kindness." "Don't mention it." Ralph shook his head. The original intention of the True Wizard Tournament was to allow everyone to make friends with foreign wizards and build friendships. I saved you with that in mind, so there's no need for repayment. Then, Alyssa thought for a moment, then changed her approach. "We can work together." "Work together?" "Yes." Alyssa smoothed her messy hair and said without reservation, "There's a canyon not far away. I found a rock dragon guarding a golden egg. We can work together to deal with it. And you can keep the golden egg. Then you can help me deal with the other magical creatures." "No need," Ralph laughed. "I can handle that rock dragon all by myself." He glanced at the girl and said, "I still appreciate your information. 30 miles west of here, in a valley, there's an emperor sailfish. It's the weakest of all the magical creatures guarding the golden egg. You can go there to get the golden egg." Upon hearing this information, Alyssa's mouth dropped open slightly. She didn't doubt its veracity. After all, the man before her was the renowned Scamander. Why would he lie to her? However, Alyssa hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you a question?" Ralph smiled enigmatically. "Since I know this information, why don't I go myself?" The girl nodded. "Too far." Ralph laughed loudly, his figure gracefully rising to land on the shoulder of the blue bear beast. It carried the boy away into the distance. Alyssa stared wide-eyed, her heart swaying, gazing intently at Ralph's retreating figure. Chapter 596 Art is an explosion. Wind-whistling gorges perpetually shrouded in fierce, knife-like winds. The wind howls sharply as it cuts through the mountain crevices, hence its name. Walking through the gorge, Luofu, listening to the howling wind and feeling the biting cold, couldn't help but shiver. He quickly waved his wand to warm himself with magic. Luofu entered this gorge to find the rock thief dragon's lair and retrieve the golden egg. But even with the eyesight of a hippogriff, he searched the gorge for a long time without success. The boy was beginning to regret not bringing the blue bear beast, which feared the rock thief dragon's scent, along. If it had been there, the scent alone would have quickly led them to the lair. Just as Luofu was hesitating whether to return to the gorge entrance, he suddenly saw corpses, half buried in a distant pile of rubble, limp and lifeless. Not one, but a whole pile. Rolf strode over, waved his wand to clear away the rubble, and then bent down to examine it closely. The dead were fallow deer, but their deaths were gruesome. Their bodies were blown to pieces, each piece of flesh showing signs of burning. Judging from the manner of death, it was definitely the work of a rock thief dragon. Rock thief dragons are a very special type of dragon. Unlike fire dragons, they don't release flames, but their saliva contains special magical substances that can react with certain components in rocks, creating explosive rocks. Explosive rocks are extremely dangerous, possessing immense explosive power. Therefore, this group of torn fallow deer must have been the work of rock thief dragons. Since food scraps had accumulated in large quantities here, the rock thief dragon's lair must be nearby. Rolf looked up at the hillside. On both sides were steep, knife-edged rock ridges, with only a few trees, sparsely packed in the crevices and fissures, their edges adorned with icicles that, from a distance, resembled snow-white fangs. Suddenly, the boy spotted a hidden hollow amidst a cluster of steep, jagged rocks. He quickly rose and flew towards the mountainside. Upon reaching the hollow, Rolf immediately recognized it as the lair of the rock thief dragon. The air was thick with the smell of ashes, and the trees and rocks within sight were charred and blackened, with broken, charred bones scattered on the ground. Rolf entered the hollow and searched, quickly finding 4 dragon eggs buried under a pile of scorching stones. 3 of the eggs had shells covered in small, dark black scales speckled with rens-like spots. The other was a golden egg. Rolf picked up the golden egg and examined it closely, discovering it was carved with the shape of a 3-headed dragon, a long tail made of gold, wings made of silver, and 3 heads carved from ivory, black gemstone, and jade respectively. Through the magical curtain, the students also saw the boy holding the golden egg aloft, and the entire audience cheered and applauded wildly for Rolf. Ludo shouted excitedly, "Oh ho ho, look! Look! Scamander got the golden egg the fastest. He's the fastest of all the warriors, while the others haven't even seen a glimpse of it yet. There's no rock thief dragon in the nest, that guy's probably out hunting. I have to say, Rove's luck is really good. I suggest he leave Windwhisper Gorge immediately, otherwise, if the rock thief dragon comes back, he'll be trapped in the nest." Many students thought so, and they shouted at the curtain, urging Rove to leave. But the boy in the Forbidden Forest didn't go. Instead, he stared at the dragon eggs with a furrowed brow. Suddenly, a ding sounded in his mind. A cracked rock wyvern egg has been detected, triggering side quest 1, help the cracked egg hatch. Reward, exploding saliva. Your saliva can secrete a special substance, like the rock wyvern, that reacts with certain components in rocks to create explosive rock bombs. Side quest 2, achieve 100% taming of the rock wyvern. Reward, cheek pouch, a special facial structure that allows your mouth to swallow objects 5 times your own volume, like the rock wyvern. Seeing the system notification about the cracked egg, Rolf was about to check when he suddenly remembered the monitor in midair. He snapped his fingers lightly. A gust of wind whipped up sand, enveloping the monitor, and the magical curtain instantly went black. Without anyone watching, Rolf crouched down, holding the dragon egg in his palm. His fingers gently traced the curves of the shell, and he quickly located the problematic egg. It was the smallest, seemingly damaged by the explosion, with a noticeable crack in the shell. Thankfully the yolk hadn't leaked out. For oviparous animals, if the shell crack wasn't severe, it could still hatch. Of course, this required treatment, otherwise, it would most likely be a dead egg. Rolf didn't intend to steal the egg, but as an excellent veterinarian, how could he bear to leave a broken dragon egg to die? A dragon's life mattered too. So, Rolf took out a wallet he'd made from the skin of a shape-shifting lizard, placed the cracked dragon egg and the golden egg inside, and then turned and flew down the mountain. But halfway down, Rolf suddenly heard a roar from the ridge. The boy looked up and saw a strangely cute magical creature in the distance, staring intently at him. The magical creature resembled a crocodile, but with a round belly that waddled as it walked, and a large head with its cheeks bulging out. Love hadn't expected to miss this rock thief dragon in its lair, but they met again on the way back. Love greeted the rock thief dragon, and it greeted him in return, albeit with its mouth. A head-sized stone shot out of its mouth and hurtled towards Love. The rock thief dragon had clearly smelled the dragon egg scent on Love, mistaking him, the veterinarian who had saved lives, for a petty egg thief. Love raised his arm and whispered, "Thunderbolt." A bright flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed by a long, whip-shaped, solid blue arc of electricity that struck the stone. Love intended to shatter the stone with lightning, but to his surprise, the moment the arc hit the rock, it exploded in mid-air like a bomb. The explosion was more powerful than Rove had imagined. He was thrown back by the blast wave, and when he emerged from the smoke and dust after tracing a small arc in the air, he suddenly realized that more than a dozen boulders had appeared beneath him. At the same moment, The rock dragon spat out a series of stones, attempting to detonate these unstable explosive rocks. Almost instantly, a deafening explosion and the resulting flashes lit up the air. At that moment, Rove had only one thought: art is an explosion. Chapter 597 Dragon Slayer Warrior? Inside the Quidditch arena, the students stared anxiously at the dark magical screen. Ever since Ralph retrieved the golden egg, they hadn't been able to see the screen, and they were frantic. The wind was probably too strong, blowing dust onto the monitors, Ludo reassured them. Don't worry, everyone, just wait a little longer. Oh, it's back to normal. The students perked up and looked at the magical screen. Sure enough, the image reappeared, and then they witnessed a horrifying scene. Ralph was flying in midair, while a rock-rift dragon on the ground spat out rock bombs at him. Then came a series of explosions and blinding flashes, engulfing the boy and the monitors. The screen only had a 3-second signal before plunging back into darkness amidst the explosions. Oh no, this is bad. The rock thief dragon's explosive rocks seemed to have damaged the monitors, Ludo exclaimed. Ralph was so close to the blast, I wonder if he'll be hurt. The students wanted to know the same thing. They were eager to see Ralph battle the rock thief dragon, but the magical screen couldn't display anything. It was like a movie reaching its climax only to have the power go out, a novel reaching its key point only to be suddenly interrupted. They were aroused by the foreplay, but couldn't enter the lion's den. Who could stand that? With this level of competence, did the Ministry of Magic even deserve to be the organizer? Boos erupted from the stands. The students' barely suppressed anger was about to ignite the entire arena. Ludo wiped the sweat from his brow and tried to calm them down. Everyone, don't get excited. The wizards guarding the perimeter will be bringing new monitors soon, but it will take a while. There's a picture there, someone shouted. Hearing the warning, everyone looked in the direction of the voice, towards the screen on the far right. After being rescued by Ralph, Elisa Boy of Durmstrang didn't rush to leave. Instead, she secretly entered Windwhisper Gorge, intending to repay his kindness by helping Ralph obtain the golden egg from the rock thief dragon. However, she failed to help Ralph and instead witnessed the explosion. While everyone else was fortunate enough to be caught up in the plot, they could clearly see a large amount of smoke from the explosion in the sky. As the smoke cleared, a somewhat disheveled Ralph was revealed. With the defensive capabilities of a fire dragon, combined with petrification, it would be difficult for him to be killed by such an explosion. However, the rock thief dragon opened its mouth wide, gulping down the rocks beside it, clearly intending to create even more powerful explosive rocks. Ralph, of course, wouldn't passively endure the attack. He also opened his mouth and inhaled sharply. The magic from the airwing bird allowed him to rapidly draw in the surrounding air like a whale swallowing seawater. Invisible ripples of air emanated from the boy's body. For a moment, Ralph's breathing even drowned out the howling mountain wind. After the boy had fed his fill, he raised his hands, grinning like a roaring tiger. Whirlwind, a powerful gale, shaped like a tornado, spewed from Ralph's mouth, sweeping towards the rock thief dragon. When it passed through a rock pillar, it instantly shattered it. The rock thief dragon was a complete couch potato. It was enormous and slow-moving, with no way to avoid it, and was quickly enveloped by the fierce gale. The rocks and small trees beside the rock thief dragon were uprooted by the gale, which was like a solid blade, and fell to the valley floor, the resounding crashes echoing endlessly. This breathtaking scene made Elisa's eyelids tremble. She clutched her robe, which was billowing in the cold wind, and retreated into the distance with fear. She had originally wanted to help Scamander fight the rock thief dragon, but now, judging from the situation, she was just glad not to be affected by his magic. The powerful gale enveloped the rock thief dragon, carving deep and shallow, long and short scratches across its back, but it was far from breaking through its thick scales. Ludo quickly noticed this and exclaimed, "The rock thief dragon has thick scales. Its defense is much stronger than that of an ordinary fire dragon. This kind of attack will hardly fail to harm it in a short time. Scamander needs more powerful magic." Of course, Ralph had more powerful magic available, but it wasn't necessary. Every magical creature has a weakness, and once that weakness is found, it's easy to exploit, including the rock thief dragon. Ralph had thoroughly studied the rock thief dragon during his secret lessons with Sherry and the others in the past few days and already knew its weakness, its jaw. The rock thief dragon's jaw was uniquely structured, composed of alternating layers of sturdy carapace and highly elastic skin. When its mouth was not filled with rocks, the skin of the rock thief dragon's jaw was contracted, and the carapace was tightly packed together, providing strong defense. But as it swallows a large amount of rocks, the jawline stretches as its mouth expands, widening the gaps between its shells and revealing soft skin. A relentless attack on the rock thief dragon's jaws would compress the explosive rocks inside, which are extremely unstable and will explode at the slightest impact. The boy waved his wand, changing the direction of the raging wind and slamming the rock thief dragon's massive body to the ground. Ralph raised his arm, palm facing upwards, and swung it downwards. A bolt of blue-white lightning, as thick as an arm, streaked across the sky like a firefly, striking the rock thief dragon's jaws. A not-so-loud explosion, almost like a giant's muffled groan, echoed from the rock thief dragon's mouth. Immediately afterward, smoke billowed from its mouth, followed by a burst of orange-white flames that, like fireworks, surged, expanded, spread, and exploded into the sky. In the Quidditch arena, almost everyone stood up, staring at the terrifying scene. Everyone instinctively looked towards the handsome young man suspended in midair. Ralph stood with his hands behind his back, looking down at the world below. The wind whipped at his face, making his sleeves flutter wildly. From afar, he appeared like a god. Everyone in the Quidditch arena, whether students from Hogwarts, Bulkspittons, or Durmstrang, was dazzled and their hearts pounded. Compared to the Quidditch audience, Elisa, inside the canyon, didn't feel so well. The violent shaking of the ground, like an earthquake, made her legs buckle, and she collapsed to her knees. When the clouds and mist cleared, Ralph landed slowly. The rock dragon had swallowed some of the rocks in time, reducing the explosive force and preventing its death. However, its jaw was mangled and bloody, and it was almost unconscious. Everyone thought Ralph was going to take the opportunity to kill the dragon. But the young man simply pulled out the distress flare issued to the champions from his pocket. Love pulled a pin on the distress flare. A plume of purple smoke rose instantly into the air and then embedded itself beside the rock dragon. The boy turned and strode towards the edge of the canyon. Chapter 598 Hogwarts has more experts. Not long after Ralph left, the Ministry of Magic's rescue team rushed to Windwhisper Canyon. They didn't find a warrior, only a blood-soaked rock thief dragon lying unconscious in a giant crater. The distress flare was stuck in front of the rock thief dragon's head. The message for its rescue was obvious. The students exchanged shocked glances. This was a rock thief dragon. What kind of student could have injured it so badly? Of course, they also feared the warrior might have already entered the rock thief dragon's stomach, so they searched the canyon and quickly found Elisa, who was still there. When they learned from her that Scamander was responsible, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then it wasn't surprising. The students, seeing the rescue team arrive through the magical veil, couldn't help but applaud, seemingly cheering for the rock thief dragon's rescue. With the Ministry of Magic's healers, that rock thief dragon will be fine. No need to worry about it, Ludo laughed. Next, the rescue team will release new monitors and find Scamander soon. Now let's turn our attention to the other heroes. Fleur Delacour has gone deep into the mine. She's hesitating at a crossroads. Oh, she's chosen the wrong way. That's not the path to the Copper Dragon. Hermione Granger has encountered a great jackal. Wait, it seems not to see Granger and is attacking in the opposite direction. Did Granger use some magic to distract the great jackal? Hey, Potter's still stuck in that web. I thought he'd been eaten by the eight-eyed spider. Harry really felt like he was about to be eaten, especially with the spider's hairy legs flailing about, its claws and silk sacs snapping, white silk dripping from its mouth, tightly binding him. Harry held his wand, only his wrist able to move, but he didn't rush to attack. He had only one chance. He had to be patient enough, wait for the giant spider to get closer, and increase his chances. Now, Harry swung his wrist, raised his wand sharply, and shouted, "A hit!" With its 8 eyes in such close range, Harry's eye charm easily struck its eyes. The giant spider howled and fell from its web, crashing to the ground, its 8 legs curling up in pain. Harry aimed his wand at the silk again, a bright blue flame leaping from the tip. The silk, like cotton thread, rapidly curled up in the intense heat. Harry and the firebolt fell to the ground with a thud. He didn't bother to remove the disgusting silk from his eyes and eyebrows. He quickly mounted the firebolt and fled into the sky. Further away in the Gobi Desert, Ron was also struggling in an antlion's trap. The antlion's trap was similar to a spider web, designed specifically for its panicked prey. The more it tried to get back to the ground, the more violently it moved, and the faster the slope collapsed. Ron was just a few steps away from the bottom of the pit when the enormous antlion, its mandibles open, stared at him with predatory eyes. Those mandibles had hundreds of sharp little teeth, like a punching machine. Ron was sweating profusely, frantically waving his wand and using every spell he could remember. As he chanted the incantation tooths like clubs, the antlion's teeth grew rapidly at an astonishing speed, quickly transforming from punching machines into a row of thumb-long, menacing barbs. Ron was terrified, his spine tingling with fear. He desperately tried to climb back up. But the antlion's growing mandibles clamped down on his leg, and with a snap, his leg was bitten off. Ron screamed like a pig being slaughtered and collapsed to the ground. He writhed and twisted in agony, frantically poking at his wand, trying to cast the eye-sick charm that Lupin had taught him all night but he hadn't mastered. The antlion, about to feast, suddenly let out a terrified and resentful cry, then released Ron and hurriedly burrowed into the ground. Ron stared blankly at the fleeing antlion, then looked at his wand in disbelief. Had he just successfully cast the eye-sick charm and driven the antlion away? Lupin had said that people can unleash amazing potential in adversity. He hadn't lied. He had indeed mastered the eye-sick charm in adversity. Was this the power of perseverance? Ron clutched his bleeding leg, the pain causing cold sweat to bead on his forehead, but the relief of surviving allowed him to force a smile. Now that he had mastered the eye-sick charm, he was confident he could pass the competition. Ron was filled with renewed confidence. Ron suddenly felt the sky darken, and heard the sudden flapping of wings. He looked up, and the smile on his face vanished instantly. A huge thunderbird swooped in, its flapping wings kicking up a cloud of dust. Its sharp talons seized Ron, like an eagle snatching a chick, and carried him into the sky. Help! Help! The antlion waited until the thunderbird disappeared before angrily emerging from its burrow, continuing to wait for the next fated one. In the valley, Sherry, having gathered a pile of sour grass leaves, drew her wand from her waist, lit it, and quickly hid behind a large rock in the distance. Sour grass leaves are a magical plant. They can be chewed dry like betel nut or lit in a pipe like tobacco. Phantom birds love sour grass leaves, just as cats are fond of catnip. This is also a common method used by wizard hunters to lure and capture them. Wisps of smoke rose from the sour grass leaves, quickly filling the valley with a peculiar fragrance. Moments later, a venomous bird was drawn by the aroma. It resembled a chameleon, with frog-like eyes, wings covered in green scales, and brightly colored feathers. The venomous bird, with its shifty eyes, stared at the burning sour grass leaves. It hesitated, glancing around cautiously, but ultimately succumbed to temptation, boldly approaching the fire and inhaling deeply. The way it puffed out smoke was like that of a 30-year-old smoker. The ponytail-wearing girl hiding behind the boulder raised her wand, aiming it at the area where the venomous bird stood. With a wave of her wand, the ground softened, transforming into a muddy swamp under the effect of a transfiguration charm. Shirley Swinton of Hogwarts has lured the puck out of its cave. Let's see how she deals with it, Ludo shouted from the Quidditch arena. Oh ho ho, Swinton has turned the ground into a swamp. Merlin, what level of transfiguration is that? Is she really only 14? The audience couldn't help but murmur amongst themselves. The Hogwarts students all knew Shirley, not only because she was always by Ralph's side, but also because of her stunning beauty. Many had heard that she was good at transfiguration, but no one expected her to be this good. The students of Oxburtons and Durmstrang were secretly wondering if Hogwarts had another expert besides Scamander. Professor McGonagall, sitting in the audience, also smiled. She had discovered Shirley's talent for transfiguration in the first lesson and had taught her everything she knew, carefully guiding her for several years. Of course, Shirley had also worked hard and lived up to expectations to reach her current level of transfiguration. Look at this. This is what a star student looks like. Seeing Professor McGonagall's eagerness to boast, Flitwick tried several times to interrupt and remind her, Shirley is a student of Ravenclaw. Your Gryffindor's star students are Potter and Weasley. Chapter 599 The Warriors of Illegal Team Formation. As the ground turned into a swamp, the poisonous bird suddenly felt its feet sink into the mud, half of its body plunging beneath its feet. It flapped its wings, but the more it struggled, the deeper it sank. It roared angrily, spewing out a foul-smelling, emerald-green venomous mist, but Sherry had already used the bubble hud charm to block out the air, rendering the mist no threat. However, the swamp wouldn't hold the poisonous bird for long. The girl with the ponytail didn't waste any time and immediately headed towards the poisonous bird's nest. A few minutes later, she successfully retrieved a golden egg. Seeing Shirley become the second warrior to retrieve the golden egg, the Hogwarts students in the stands cheered for her. But Ludo shouted, "Swinton may have gotten the egg, but she needs to be careful. Judging from the magical veil, she might encounter Durmstrang's warriors after leaving the valley. The rules don't prohibit stealing the golden egg, meaning every warrior is just as vulnerable as the magical creatures guarding it." Deep in the Forbidden Forest, Polyako, having circled the valley's perimeter, asked in a low voice, "Lucas, are you sure the pike bird is in the valley?" "Yes, I came in from around here," said a somewhat chubby boy. "I saw the pike bird finish foraging and enter the valley. Its nest must be inside. Then what are we waiting for?" A black-haired wizard named Kuhn exclaimed excitedly. "Let's go in." Polyako remained silent, lost in thought. They had already learned from Headmaster Karkaroff about the magical creatures they would face, and the pike bird was definitely one of the easier ones to deal with. Especially since there are now 3 of them. That's right, the 3 warriors are acting together. Upon learning of the competition, Polyako immediately contacted the other warriors at Durmstrang, planning to legally team up for the competition. Lucas and Kuhn agreed readily, because they also felt they would have a hard time fighting a magical creature like a fire dragon. Going it alone was doomed to failure. Only by banding together could they achieve a win-win situation. As for why they didn't contact Crumb, since they were all Durmstrang students, the reason was simple. Polyako had long disliked this international superstar, not only because Crumb enjoyed privileges at school, but more importantly, his fame was too great, completely overshadowing everyone else. There was also the female warrior, Elisa Boy, whom Polyako had hinted at collaborating with, but she refused. HMPH, that stupid woman, she definitely wouldn't pass the first challenge. With the 3 of them acting together, Polyako believed they could successfully complete the first challenge, but his ambitions didn't stop there. He also wanted fame, to be as famous as Scamander and Crumb. If he could defeat them and win the Triwizard Tournament, he would naturally become famous. Therefore, Polyako planned to take Lucas and Kuhn to steal more golden eggs, which would eliminate some competitors and add many extra points. In fact, they had just encountered a Boxburton's warrior on the road, forcing him to release a distress flare. Thinking this, Polyako walked towards the valley with Lucas and Kuhn, but stopped abruptly just before entering. Polyako saw a beautiful young woman in a white robe walking alone towards the valley's exit. His eyes instantly burned with intense desire. The night he arrived at Hogwarts, Polyako had caught a glimpse of Sherry in the Great Hall and was immediately captivated. He had been restless for days, finally unable to resist seeking her out, only to find that the girl was rarely seen at Hogwarts. When he did see her, Sherry was always standing next to Scamander, offering almost no opportunity to strike up a conversation. Polyako hadn't expected to meet her in the competition today. This Triwizard Tournament was truly his lucky day. Lucas, seeing such a strikingly beautiful girl, was also momentarily stunned, but he quickly noticed that she was holding a golden egg. Lucas was initially startled, not expecting someone else to have gotten the egg first, but he quickly became excited. This meant they wouldn't have to face the dangerous phantom bird anymore. They could simply snatch the egg from the girl. Just as he was about to ask if they should make a move, Polyako, beaming, asked in heavily accented English, "Miss Swinton, you may have heard of me. My name is Polyako, a warrior of Durmstrang. What a coincidence to meet you here." "Oh, you've already gotten the golden egg from the phantom bird." Sherry stopped in her tracks. She didn't speak, but frowned and drew her wand. Polyako grinned, his expression understanding. "Don't be nervous. I know you're all alone and worried we'll steal your golden egg. We wouldn't do something so underhanded." Seeing Lucas about to object, Polyako quickly glared at him, signaling him not to scare away his prey, and continued, "We won't steal your golden egg, but we want to discuss something with you. Would you like to join us?" Polyako, acting on his own initiative, said, "Although you have the golden egg, you still need to collect ghost grass and dragon crystals, which are guarded by powerful magical creatures. It's difficult to do alone. Why not join us and help each other?" The competition would last 2 days and 1 night. If Sherry was willing to join the team, Polyako would have plenty of time to spend alone with her. Lucas and Kuhn immediately understood Polyako's intention, but they didn't object. Adding someone would mean more strength, and this girl was so beautiful, they were willing to travel with her. Whoever could pluck this flower would, of course, depend on their own abilities. Sherry ignored them, gripping her wand tightly and continuing on her way, seemingly wanting to leave the valley. Lucas, looking at the ungrateful girl, said impatiently, Polyako, we can't let her go. Since she won't agree, let's just take the golden egg. Polyako stared intently at Sherry, a face he found increasingly appealing. She was far superior to any of Durmstrang's female students. Undeterred, he still smiled brightly, but his tone carried a hint of threat. Look, my companions don't want to let you go. You only have two choices, either team up with us or hand over the golden egg. We don't want to bully you, but don't force us to. Sherry finally spoke for the first time, coldly saying, you can try. She was about to raise her wand to attack when she suddenly felt the gallon Rolf had given her for locating them burning in her pocket. The girl with the ponytail smiled radiantly. Polyako and the others were too late to witness this breathtaking scene, for a gigantic bear-like magical creature burst forth from the forest, crashing heavily before them. The ground trembled violently and cracked, torn open in a pattern resembling a spider web. Polyako stared in disbelief, looking up to see a blond boy perched on the beast's shoulder. He immediately recognized him, Scamander. The next second, he saw Scamander lightly tap his toe on the bear's shoulder, his body shooting towards him like an arrow. Lucas, standing nearby, tensed instantly, his scalp tingling. Just as he was about to react, he saw Polyako fly backward. His face filled with horror, he watched as Polyako slammed into a large tree, then was grabbed by the neck by Scamander. Polyako, like a snake struck at its vital point, didn't even struggle, his feet rising higher and higher off the ground. Rolf looked at him, his voice warm and gentle, and smiled. I have a golden egg here, would you like it? Chapter 600 Rolf's Punishment. Rolf slammed Polyako against a large tree, then slowly lifted him into the air. Polyako struggled desperately, trying to chant a spell, but his throat was tightly gripped, preventing him from uttering a single word. He could only desperately pound Scamander's arm with his hands. Make Sherry hand over the golden egg, or you'll have to team up with me. Rolf's eyes were cold, a mocking smile playing on his lips. Of all the jokes I've heard, yours is the funniest. I'm almost dying of laughter. The boy tightened his grip, and Polyako, his face flushed red, nearly suffocating. I'm curious, who gave you the courage to be so arrogant? It couldn't be your headmaster, Kakarov, could it? Rolf glanced sideways at the monitor in midair, while Kakarov, sitting on the referee's platform, felt a chill run down his spine as he looked at the face behind the magical curtain. Although they were hundreds of miles apart, he inexplicably felt Scamander staring at him. Love withdrew his gaze, looked at Polyako, and sneered, since you can't control your eyes or your chaotic thoughts, I'll reluctantly help Kakarov teach you a lesson. Love suddenly raised his leg and delivered a powerful knee strike to Polyako's abdomen, nearly knocking him unconscious, his body arching like a shrimp. Just then, a black light shot from behind Love, causing the boy's body to tilt sharply to the right, the spell striking Polyako's stomach. A slight crackling sound came from Polyako's abdomen, accompanied by a burnt smell. Love released his grip, and Polyako collapsed to the ground, screaming in agony as if being boiled in oil, his body twisting and writhing wildly. Rolf turned around, looking at Lucas with amusement, and chuckled, I've heard Durmstrang teaches students dark magic, it seems the rumors are true. But attacking your own classmate, isn't that going too far? Lucas was shocked. He hadn't expected Scamander to dodge this sneak attack. How did this guy manage to do it when his back was to everyone? Lucas didn't have time to think. He swung his wand again, wanting to launch a counterattack, but the next second, he found himself flying through the air. From Coon's perspective, he saw the blue bear slap Lucas in the back, sending him flying several meters. Lucas crashed into a large tree, then slammed to the ground, bouncing once before collapsing like a limp rag doll. With several broken ribs, Lucas immediately fainted. Coon froze, too terrified to move, barely daring to breathe, lest Scamander mistake him for an attacker. He tried to minimize his presence, but Rolf still looked at him, smiling, and said, Aren't you going to check on your classmates' injuries? Coon swallowed hard. Just as he was about to obediently check, he saw Rolf wave his wand. A magical whip whistled through the air, instantly wrapping around Coon's neck, and with a cast, he was sent flying, crashing head-on into Polyako. Polyako, already struck by Lucas's dark magic and then hit by Coon, felt as if his entire body was being torn apart, experiencing excruciating pain. Rolf crouched down, looking at the two and asking, having fun? Coon huddled on the ground, his face full of fear, pleading, Scamander, I didn't threaten that girl, Nor did I use any dark magic on you, it was all Polyako and Lucas, so, you can talk to me safely now, Ralph chuckled. Don't be afraid, I won't do anything to you. I'm going to let you go, really, Coon's eyes widened. Then he seemed to remember something, his voice trembling. You want us to use distress flares and forfeit a match? The three of them had just dealt with a Volksbritton student in the same way. No, you've finally become warriors, participating in the True Wizard tournament. How could you do such a thing? Ralph grinned. On the contrary, I want you to continue the match, so I'm taking your distress flares away. Enjoy the match, and I hope to see you at Hogwarts again tomorrow evening. At this moment, the Quidditch arena was buzzing with excited chatter, like a swarm of bees. They had just witnessed Durmstrang's warriors blocking Sherry's path and threatening her, and had been indignantly cursing these Viking barbarians. Now, seeing Ralph appear and beat them up, they cheered and applauded. The Durmstrang students exchanged bewildered glances. The school allowed the use of dark magic in even duels, so they always considered themselves, compared to other magic schools, to be exceptionally martial. Polyako, Lucas, and Coon, being among the 5 warriors, proved they were among Durmstrang's best. But these two, who usually acted arrogantly and domineeringly at Durmstrang, couldn't even withstand a single blow from Scamander before being completely defeated. It was truly brutal. Durmstrang's poor ranking in magic education, its failure to win a single True Wizard Cup championship in 700 years, was no accident, a disgrace. Meanwhile, a serious argument broke out among the judges. Polyako and Lucas were seriously injured, yet Scamander took their distress flares. Karkaroff protested. Such egregious behavior warrants Scamander's disqualification. Before Dumbledore could speak, Maxim retorted, your school's warriors can team up and steal other people's golden eggs, so why can't others steal your distress flares? Have you no shame? Her students had just been forced to use distress flares and abandon the first challenge by Polyako, Lucas, and Coon, and Ralph had avenged them. She was overjoyed and would never allow him to be disqualified. How can they be the same? Karkaroff roared. Stealing the golden egg isn't life-threatening, but if a warrior is injured and doesn't receive treatment, his life is in danger. In all the previous True Wizard tournaments, which one didn't have deaths? Maxim retorted. Besides, which rule forbids stealing someone else's distress flare? These were the same words Karkaroff had just used to justify the three's illegal team formation, and now Maxim was returning the favor verbatim. Dumbledore, what do you say? Karkaroff asked. Are we just going to watch Durmstrang's warriors die? In fact, they'll be fine, Dumbledore said cheerfully. Didn't you notice that Ralph specifically left a student behind to protect Polyako and Lucas? As long as the 3 of them stay put and don't provoke those powerful magical creatures, they'll be in no danger. At most, they'll suffer for a day and a night without medical help, but they won't die. Ralph is very sensible, Dumbledore smiled. However, if your student Coon abandons Polyako and Lucas and runs away, that's another story. If it were my student, he certainly wouldn't do such a thing, and I believe your student is equally virtuous and wouldn't abandon his injured classmates. Don't you have any faith in your student? Thanks to Ibuka for the donation. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.